That night, in the $3.5 million oceanfront villa, Robert and Wendy Spohr had just wished each other good night after a warm day spent with their children and grandchildren. Just an hour later, gunshots tore through the night. When police arrived, Robert was dead on the sofa, shot through the head. Wendy lay dying in the bathroom, shot twice in the temple. Despite heavy blood loss and labored breathing, she managed to call 911. There was no sign of forced entry or warning at the scene. The white-masked killer had patiently lurked in the shadows of their home for hours, then left as if he had never been there. 2 years later, the truth was revealed. The killer was none other than their son-in-law, former baseball player Daniel Serafini, and his secret lover. It was a cold, calculated assassination, hidden behind the facade of a seemingly perfect family. In 2021, Robert Gary Spohr, 70, and his wife Wendy Wood, 68, lived in Lake Tahoe, California. They owned a spacious, cozy lakeside home worth $3.5 million. Married for 45 years. They had 2 daughters, Adrienne and Erin, both with families of their own. Despite living separately, the parents stayed very close to their children and loved spending time with their grandchildren. On June 5, 2021, Erin visited with her 2 sons. They spent most of that day together. At 7:35 p.m., Erin picked up the children and left. After seeing their daughter and grandchildren off, Robert and Wendy entered the house, got ready for bed, went upstairs and watched TV. They had no idea their peaceful evening was about to be shattered. Around 8:30 p.m., a call came into 911, but the caller couldn't speak clearly, only making faint, gurgling sounds. Alarmed, the dispatcher immediately sent police and paramedics. Police arrived first. On the second floor, they found Robert lying on the couch near the fireplace, dead from a gunshot wound to the head. His position suggested he was taken by surprise and didn't have time to react. Wendy was found nearby in the bathroom. She had been shot twice in the head but was still alive, and she had been the one to call 911. In critical condition, she could only say her name before losing consciousness. She was rushed to a local hospital with a grim prognosis. As paramedics fought to save Wendy, detectives began processing the scene. They recovered 6 spent .22 caliber shell casings, later confirming the weapon was a pistol. Investigators then searched the surrounding area. They obtained footage from security cameras near the lake, where a popular bike path and a highway run nearby. In the footage, a lone figure appears at 5:30 p.m., about 3 hours before the 911 call, walking along the bike path toward Robert's house. This person immediately drew attention, partly because no one else was outside at that time, and partly due to the unusual outfit. A black hoodie pulled up to cover the face, and the lower half of the face covered with white tape or a mask. The individual walked cautiously, looking around, then paused to watch the house before breaking into a run and moving in a crouch toward the property. He appeared to enter the home and remain inside for hours, not emerging until after Erin and her children left. Shortly after the 911 call, the same figure ran out of the house and disappeared. The footage suggested the suspect was male, but no identity could be determined. Police held a press conference, released the video, and asked the public for leads. No other nearby homes had reported break-ins or assaults, implying Robert and Wendy were specifically targeted. There was no sign of forced entry, suggesting the shooter knew them and was let in or had a key. Detectives began investigating Robert and Wendy's backgrounds to look for a motive. They have lived in the lake house for about 20 years. They met in college and remained inseparable. Besides raising their 2 daughters, they worked together in real estate and loved to travel. They had lived in Hong Kong before settling in California in 2000, a move that was deliberate and carefully chosen. Wendy grew up in a nearby suburb and always dreamed of living by Lake Tahoe, a picturesque place. That dream turned into a nightmare. Wendy barely survived the attack and was placed in intensive care with a severe head injury. She miraculously lived but had to relearn how to speak and even how to hold a spoon. Police guarded her closely, worried the attacker might return to silence a key witness. They also hoped she would recover enough to describe what she saw. At first, this wasn't possible due to her condition. So, investigators searched for clues on their own. With almost no physical evidence left behind by the killer, detectives examined Robert and Wendy's lives and relationships, looking for a motive. Especially in their business dealings, Robert and Wendy were wealthy, which could have drawn envy or hostility. But investigators found no threats, stalking, or hostile messages. Their daughter and others close to them had never heard of anything unusual. What seemed like a key lead eventually led to a dead end. Still, some things were noted. Robert was not always pleasant. He was sometimes rude, especially when it came to property and personal space. By November 2021, police had searched the homes of all family members, including Robert's, but found nothing useful. The murder weapon was never located, and no gun matched the shell casings from the scene. Despite ongoing efforts, the case stalled for 8 months. During that time, Wendy recovered enough to speak with detectives, but her information was less helpful than hoped. In February 2022, things shifted. Early that month, Adrienne held a press conference at her home. She couldn't sit still and was extremely worried about her mother, Wendy. She believes that solving the case might help her mother overcome the loss of her husband. At the press conference, she repeated what law enforcement had already learned and, at the end, offered a $150,000 reward for information leading to the identification of the person caught on camera. By then, Wendy could speak fully and had largely recovered physically, though she remained emotionally devastated. Unfortunately, her account did not advance the case. She said the attack happened while she was dozing. After the first shot to her head, she instinctively ran to the bathroom without seeing the shooter. A second shot knocked her unconscious and left her blind. Wendy later woke to her dog, licking her face. The attacker was gone. All she could do was call 911. She spent 6 weeks in intensive care, followed by a long rehabilitation. Even afterward, she remembered nothing more. She now understood she was in danger, fearing the attacker might return at any time. The uncertainty weighed heavily. She had no idea who would target her and her husband. Investigators hoped her memory would eventually return and yield crucial clues, but instead, a year after the attack, Wendy passed away. According to Erin, she could not bear the loss of her beloved husband, Robert. Afterward, Erin and Adrienne moved into a house on the lake. They inherited their parents' property and continued to seek justice, but without success. For nearly 2 years, the investigation remained stalled. Only on April 21, 2023, did the county sheriff's office release new public details. Even then, the suspect had not been caught. Authorities were just beginning to develop the most important leads in the case. On June 5, 2023, Adrienne went to the police, accusing Erin and her husband, Daniele Serafini, of being responsible for her parents' deaths. Erin was married to Daniel, a former Major League Baseball player who later played in Mexico. His career had been successful, but he had begun to encounter problems. In 2013, Daniel retired from professional baseball. Afterward, he founded a baseball academy and owned a bar called the Oak Tavern. He and his wife, Erin, ran a business together, following the example of her parents, Robert and Wendy. After that, Adrienne filed a lawsuit against Erin and Daniel, alleging that they had manipulated Wendy into harming herself following a failed assassination attempt. Before her death, Wendy disinherited Erin. Adrienne believes their motive is money. To seize $23 million in real estate, she believed Erin tried to persuade Wendy to make her the sole heir. Adrienne, however, wanted to restore the original agreement her parents had signed, which split the inheritance equally between the sisters. In the end, Erin did not receive any inheritance from her parents. Adrienne, despite having a boyfriend who had been convicted of robbery, received everything. Adrienne's boyfriend had an alibi, so he was eliminated as a suspect. Detectives investigated Adrienne's accusations, but the results were not what she expected. 4 months later, on October 20, 2023, it was not Erin who was arrested, but 49-year-old Daniel and 33-year-old Samantha Scott. Samantha was already known to Robert, Wendy, and the rest of the family. Investigators alleged that Daniel targeted Robert and Wendy's wealth and began removing anyone who stood in his way. His in-laws were the first victims, beyond murder and attempted murder charges. Daniel was also charged with child abuse and child endangerment for allegedly ambushing his sons at a relative's home before opening fire. He was arrested in Winnemucca, Nevada, and Samantha was later apprehended in Las Vegas. Adrienne is shocked by the cruelty of Daniel, who her parents treat like their own son. Erin, however, remained skeptical and insisted Daniel was innocent, calling the accusations lies. The sisters agreed on only one point. Neither expected Samantha to be involved. Daniel was known not only for his pitching career but also for a steroid scandal in 2008. That incident marked the beginning of his decline in professional sports. His contract was terminated, and he was subsequently waived by every major league team. Although he earned about $14 million over his career, he lost a significant portion in a divorce from his first wife, who left him after the steroid scandal. In 2012, Daniel married Erin. They moved into a large 5-bedroom home in Reno, Nevada, valued at over $1 million. Many investments and business ventures failed in succession, eventually leading to bankruptcy. Even when he opened the bar, Daniel had to ask his parents-in-law for a loan and managed to raise $240,000 to keep it running. But his spending did not decrease. His financial ambitions were too great. He repeatedly sought financial help from his wealthy in-laws, Robert and Wendy. By 2015, Daniel had lost his savings and accumulated $300,000 in debt. He kept seeking financial support, but it couldn't go on indefinitely. During this time, his behavior deteriorated. Even staff reported he began physically abusing them, something he hadn't done before. Erin stood by him, remembering who he had been and seeing what he was becoming. She worked as a horse trainer and didn't earn much, but the family tried to maintain their lifestyle. Daniel was used to spending freely, but his income no longer matched. He even took a job at a gold mine near their lake house, yet it still wasn't enough to cover his debts. Despite the financial difficulties, his family continued to spend as usual. Erin supported Daniel so steadfastly that Adrienne began to suspect she might have been involved in the attempt on their parents' lives. Samantha Scott had known the family for years. She worked as a nanny who frequently cared for Daniel and Erin's sons. She met Erin long before the attack, initially approaching Erin for horse riding lessons. Samantha also babysat for other families. When she first started coming to the house, Daniel reportedly fell in love with her. Daniel said he was unhappy in his marriage because, after having 2 sons in a previous marriage, he didn't want more children. Despite that, he and Erin had 2 additional children. He stayed with Erin for the children's sake, but planned to divorce her once they grew up. Samantha sympathized with his situation and began an affair with him. After Samantha was arrested, she denied everything. At first, even her sisters doubted her guilt. She has been a friend of Robert and Wendy's family for many years. During Wendy's recovery from the attack, Samantha regularly visited the lake house and met with everyone to offer support. But her true role in the events was still unclear. The investigation was reaching its peak, and prosecutors were preparing their case. The first person to go to trial is Daniel Serafini. At the preliminary hearing, the prosecution explained how they built their case and gathered evidence. Witnesses were crucial. One of Daniel's employees recognized him in the Masked Man video. Because of his distinctive gait, Daniel had a slight limp from a sports injury. Multiple witnesses also testified that he spread malicious rumors about his in-laws, Robert and Wendy, claiming they abused, beat, and starved their grandchildren during weekend or holiday visits. Years before the crime, other witnesses heard Daniel looking for a hitman to kill his wife's parents, offering $20,000 for the double murder, and approaching several men with legal troubles. A month before the crime, his attitude shifted. Daniel allegedly began saying he would kill Robert and Wendy himself. No one reported this because they didn't take him seriously. He was known to be hot-tempered and prone to dark jokes, so they assumed he was venting or joking. Investigators reconstructed the timeline. Daniel and Samantha stayed at a hotel in Verde, Nevada, near a gold mine where Daniel worked. The next day, their vehicles were seen near the mine. Initially, Samantha stated that on the day the murder occurred, she was at the hotel they had rented to secretly meet in Verde. Her story seemed credible. Cell phone data even supported it. But she made one mistake. A Subaru matching hers, without license plates, was seen near the lake house less than an hour before the attack. Detectives believe she dropped Daniel off near the house and waited to pick him up after the murders. Her car's geolocation confirmed she was near the crime scene at the time of the shooting. During the preliminary hearing, the defense strategy became clear. The defense attorney wants to persuade the jury that Wendy and Robert are cruel, manipulative people who, for many years, oppressed Daniel, forcing him to use force. They cited a 2018 restraining order against Robert after he provoked a conflict and attacked a fisherman near their home. The defense also attempted to shift suspicion to Adrienne, claiming she benefited financially from Robert and Wendy's deaths and had accused Erin and Daniel unfairly. Adrienne's then-boyfriend was considered, but ruled out due to a solid alibi. A fierce legal battle loomed, and Samantha still faced trial. In February 2025, she accepted a plea deal. She would plead guilty to conspiracy. In return, prosecutors dropped the murder, attempted murder, and burglary charges. She would be tried only for complicity and, in exchange, testify against Daniel. After accepting the deal, she was placed under house arrest, angering Adrienne and Erin, who believed she belonged in prison. Daniel Serafini's trial began on May 19, 2025. Early in the proceedings, the prosecution presented messages in which Daniel told Samantha he would one day kill his in-laws, Robert and Wendy. The defense countered that Daniel had no motive to kill them because they paid many of their daughter's expenses and also supported him financially. Specifically, he received a $90,000 check from them just days before Robert's death. According to the prosecution, Samantha and Daniel had a highly emotional relationship. Because of her feelings, Samantha lied in 2021 to cover for him, though her perjury was excused under the plea agreement. A striking detail was that the affair continued even after Daniel was incarcerated. He regularly sent her love letters, decorated with origami roses made from prison toilet paper. The prosecution called several witnesses, including Daniel's former boss. He testified that one day, while driving Daniel to work, Daniel, in a fit of rage, said he wanted to kill his wife's parents, Robert and Wendy. He justified this by claiming they were abusing his children. He seemed to genuinely believe it, yet there was no evidence supporting any abuse by Robert or Wendy. In response, the boss suggested Daniel simply stop taking the children to his in-laws' house to avoid conflict. Daniel refused and changed the subject. His former boss did not call the police because he believed Daniel's words were just a spur-of-the-moment outburst, not a serious one. The prosecutor also argued that Daniel's phone activity on the day of the shooting was suspicious. Normally, he sent more than 100 texts a day and made frequent calls, but that day he sent none. An unusual change. Daniel's brother, Joe Raffini, also testified. According to Joe Raffini, Daniel tried to hire him to kill his parents-in-law for $20,000. Samantha, testifying against Daniel, said she drove him to the lake house and later picked him up after the double murder, though she claimed she did not know why he was going there. Daniel avoided discussing the murders, saying he was only trying to buy banned substance and hadn't planned to kill anyone. Samantha's credibility was questioned, but after accepting a plea deal, she said she was telling the truth. Even Daniel defended her, claiming she genuinely didn't know his plans. He kept his intentions secret, but asked her for a ride. From the start, his requests were suspicious. He wanted to remove all identifying marks from Samantha's car, even suggesting destroying it and reporting it stolen to the police. Samantha refused. Daniel then offered her $5,000 for the trip, on the condition that she replaced the car afterward. She agreed, partly because he refused to share details. After she picked him up, he changed the route, and they took a long detour. While Samantha drove, Daniel threw clothing out of the car piece by piece. He got rid of a pair of gloves and a face mask, then disassembled a gun and disposed of its parts the same way. Samantha continued to insist that he never told her what happened and that she assumed he was being secretive because of a banned substance. She said that only months later, during the investigation, did Daniel admit to shooting Wendy, while saying nothing about Robert. When Daniel's wife, Erin, testified, she defended him and claimed Samantha had pushed Daniel toward murder. Erin said she felt deceived, not betrayed. Erin argued that it made no sense for Daniel to kill her parents, since they had been financially supporting the couple. Now that support was gone. The prosecution, however, argued that Erin was deluded and that the trial may have saved her life. They claimed that for Daniel to access Robert and Wendy's inheritance, he needed to remain married to Erin, and then she would have to die. In their view, Erin could have been the next target, as she was the final obstacle between Daniel and her parents' money. On July 14, 2025, a jury found 50-year-old Daniel Serafini guilty of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and first-degree burglary. He faced life in prison without the possibility of parole. On August 19, 2025, before sentencing, Daniel filed a motion for a new trial. In February 2025, Samantha Scott pleaded guilty to being an accessory after the fact. She was released pending sentencing and faces up to 3 years in prison. Following the verdict, Erin Serafini filed for divorce and sought custody of her 2 sons, who were 7 and 4 years old at the time of Daniel's sentencing. Notably, she remained on good terms with Daniel throughout the trial and did not request restrictions on his visitation with the children. This led some people following the case to suspect Erin was involved, but there was never any evidence to support it. She was never charged, and her alleged involvement was never proven. Some neighbors and family friends cited her strained relationship with her parents as indirect evidence, but this remained hearsay. Erin was known to frequently ask her parents for money, which caused repeated conflicts. Even Adrienne described Erin as a troublemaker and the family's black sheep. On June 28, 2023, police officers in Andover forced open the door of a quiet suburban home after neighbors grew worried about the man who lived there. Inside, they were hit by the stench of decay. In the living room, beneath a white sheet, lay the body of 62-year-old Stuart Maxwell Crocker, a retired British Army veteran. But the most disturbing detail, for days after his death, someone stayed in that house, posting TikTok videos, smiling at the camera, and bragging about being a bad girl. That person was Winter Swan Miller, the very woman Stuart had trusted and let into his life. Who was she? Why did she turn his kindness into horror? Stay with us until the end as we uncover the shocking truth behind the murder of Stuart Maxwell Crocker. On June 28, 2023, the local authorities in Andover received a call from a concerned resident reporting that their elderly neighbor had not been outside for several days. The man was known for a steady routine and frequent contact with neighbors, so his sudden absence was unusual. His front door remained closed and he had missed his regular walks. Officers were sent to check on him. After obtaining legal authorization, officers forced entry. They were met by a strong odor and found the house lived in but disordered. In the living room, they discovered the man's body on the floor, partly covered by a white sheet. A fan had been left running on high and pointed at the body. On the coffee table sat a powered-off cell phone beside a charger. Handwritten notes, some containing hostile or aggressive phrases, were scattered on the floor. Police collected these items for forensic analysis. There were no signs of forced entry or theft, and valuables remained in place. A small Pomeranian dog was found near the body. It appeared calm and uninjured. In the kitchen, investigators documented used syringes, packaging, and traces of unknown substances. These were sent to a laboratory for testing. No blood was visible on walls or furniture. The condition of the body, decomposition, and skin changes indicated death had occurred several days earlier. The body's position and markings on the arms suggested possible defensive wounds. Detectives also recovered surveillance footage from nearby houses. One recording showed an unidentified person entering the residence about 5 days before the discovery. Later footage captured a woman leaving the home in daylight. Her identity was initially unknown. After she left, no one else was recorded entering the house. From the outset, investigators treated the death as suspicious. Several factors: the body's position, the room's disorder, the running fan, and the unattended dog supported that concern. The deceased was identified as Stuart Maxwell Crocker, 62 years old, a retired British Army veteran who lived alone in the modest Andover home he had owned for years and received a military pension. He kept regular contact with family, including adult children and his former spouse. People who knew him described him as mild-mannered, calm, and helpful, with no history of disputes. Interviews revealed that a few weeks before his death, Stuart had allowed a woman to stay with him. Family members did not know the full circumstances of her arrival. Stuart reportedly told his former spouse that he was temporarily helping an acquaintance who had nowhere else to go. Relatives could not recall the woman's name or provide other details. Neighbors confirmed seeing a young woman at the house, often with a dog, smoking on the porch. They reported increased noise and occasional shouting, but no specific incidents of violence. The woman's behavior was described as unusual. She came and went at odd hours, returned with shopping bags, frequently spoke on the phone, and sometimes recorded herself on camera. Examination of the cell phone found at the scene revealed an active TikTok account linked to the woman who had been staying with Stuart in the weeks before his death. The account contained dozens of videos posted throughout June 2023. Some videos were uploaded after the estimated time of death and were clearly filmed inside the room where his body was later found. In one clip, the woman reportedly spoke to viewers, gave her name, said that she was taking a break from posting and, smiling, ended with a remark that she had been a bad girl, behaving casually as if she were unaware of any serious situation. In another video, she said she was hungry and was going out to buy groceries. The room visible in the background matched the location where Stuart's body was discovered. Location data from the phone and footage from nearby surveillance cameras confirmed she left the house after recording. She went to a local chain grocery store and bought food and a leash for the small dog. A witness who saw her at the store said she was talking with a man she seemed to know. During their conversation, she calmly declared that she would be famous soon and said that people were going to hear about her. She appeared relaxed, showed no panic, and made no attempt to flee. The woman's phone contained videos and a series of messages, including drafts of letters addressed to a man named Steve, who was incarcerated. In those drafts, she described the incident in detail, claimed responsibility for Stuart's death, and said she had stayed near the body while composing the texts. She also wrote of plans to publish a book about the event, expressing confidence it would bring her fame and money. The messages were boastful, without remorse or any claim of self-defense. Investigators found handwritten notes throughout the home. Some notes contained hostile remarks aimed at Stewart. Others were fragmented personal reflections. A few entries suggested planning ahead, taken together with the letters. These materials pointed toward deliberate action, rather than an impulsive or purely emotional response. Especially important were video clips, showing the woman apparently trying to provoke Stewart into conversation. She asked unrelated or leading questions, seemingly attempting to elicit particular responses. Stewart appeared confused in the footage, never aggressive, repeatedly saying he didn't understand what was happening. None of the videos showed him behaving hostilely. On social media, she frequently expressed affection for a small Pomeranian named Oblivion. The dog appeared often in her posts and captions. She wrote that she loved the dog more than people and called it the only one you can trust. Videos featuring the dog continued to be posted after Stewart's death. This pattern supported the investigators' theory that she remained in the home for several days after the incident. Based on the evidence, investigators concluded that for several days following Stewart's death, she continued living in his house, using his belongings and posting publicly online. The woman was later identified as Winter Swan Miller. She was born on November 1986 in the United Kingdom and spent her early years with her mother. Her mother worked hard to provide a calm, stable home, despite limited finances, and Winter later described her as her main source of support. Her father was absent until she was about 7. He then reappeared from Cornwall and began taking her during school breaks. Rather than providing care, his visits became a source of emotional harm. He made degrading remarks about her appearance and repeatedly told her she did not meet his expectations, which eroded her self-esteem and left her feeling rejected and insecure. In an effort to win his approval, Winter changed her appearance, but his attitude did not improve. When she was 12, he forcibly shaved her head just before she started middle school. The incident triggered a severe emotional breakdown. At school, she faced ridicule, social pressure, and isolation, and she began to withdraw, lose interest in classes, and sometimes refuse to attend. Rather than helping, her father encouraged aggression, stoked conflict, and reinforced harmful beliefs. The most alarming episode occurred when he took her away without her mother's consent. She was missing for nearly 5 months. When she returned, she was emotionally fragile and depleted. She later reported experiences from that period that she described as unacceptable and deeply damaging, leaving lasting emotional scars and suggesting her father's behavior was far from protective. Although these allegations were never formally recorded, the psychological harm was clear. After she reunited with her mother, all contact with her father was stopped. But the damage had already been done. Winter did not get the support she needed from social services or schools because her early traumas were never addressed. She developed deep mistrust of others, a constant sense of danger, and a defensive mindset, even in situations that were not actually threatening. By adolescence, these coping patterns, emotional withdrawal, avoidance, and instability, were firmly established. At school, she was labeled a troubled teen, but her behavior stemmed not from hostility, so much as from a lack of emotional safety. The unresolved traumas became the hidden basis for later problems. At 13, Winter fully disengaged from formal education. After repeated absences and escalating conflicts, she left school. Her mother tried to help by tutoring her at home, but outside influences had already taken hold. Winter moved into a circle where illicit substances, inappropriate behavior, and relationships with much older people became common. When she was 14, she began a relationship with a man in his mid-20s. The relationship was clearly unbalanced. He used psychological pressure to control her daily choices and appearance, and he regularly belittled her. Winter responded by repeating early learned patterns, seeking approval and adapting to others' demands. Rather than getting support, isolated and criticized, she increasingly relied on psychoactive substances to cope. Occasional use became frequent, and then dependent use. Attempts to stop often ended in relapse, which undermined her ability to manage daily life and emotions. During this period, she also cycled through short-term partners. Many of these relationships were transactional, based on housing, money, or shared substance use, not emotional connection. This created a reinforcing cycle of instability. In 2009, at 23, Winter was charged with causing bodily harm. The case resulted in a non-custodial sentence. This was the first legal intervention and marked the start of repeated displays of aggressive behavior, worsening substance use, deteriorating mental health, and increased conflict deepened her instability. Around the same time, she developed an unusual hobby, collecting bladed weapons and similar items, brass knuckles, knives, decorative swords, which she displayed and referenced often in private writings. The collection seemed to be more than aesthetic. It suggested a need for control and psychological protection, which alarmed the few people who still kept in touch with her. Winter's mood was erratic during this period. Intense irritability, frequent mood swings, and sudden emotional breakdowns. Despite clear signs of distress, she avoided seeking professional help, driven by deep mistrust of support systems and a belief that she had to handle everything alone. That need for control simultaneously kept her from getting help and left her more vulnerable. About a year after her first legal trouble, Winter experienced a short period of relative stability when she entered a relationship with a woman named Natalie. People who knew them described this as the only long-term, a stable partnership in Winter's life. Their relationship developed gradually and without public drama. Natalie, who was older and calm, did not try to control Winter. For the first time, Winter seemed to find emotional safety and acceptance. With that stability, she began exploring new directions in her life. Initially, Winter worked as a veterinary assistant and later moved into pet care. Over time, she learned grooming and began offering dog grooming services. The work was inconsistent, but it gave her a sense of purpose and a modest income, allowing some financial independence. During this period, she adopted a Pomeranian named Oblivion and often posted photos and videos of him, saying she trusted him more than people. Winter lived with Natalie for about 5 years. In that time, she avoided serious legal trouble, kept a small social circle, and rarely discussed her past. Friends and acquaintances described her as calmer and more reserved during those years. She made a visible effort to stay within certain boundaries. However, she did not stop using prohibited substances entirely. Although less frequent, using illegal substances was still her way of coping with stress and anxiety. Everything changed after Natalie's sudden health decline and passing. Natalie's death was a turning point. Winter lost emotional stability, resumed regular substance use, withdrew from others, and abandoned old routines. She immersed herself in digital platforms, especially TikTok, posting short videos, dances, lip syncs, clips with her dog, and sometimes provocative material. Occasionally, she shared candid moments, personal reflections, emotional outbursts, pleas for support, and comments about feeling alone. Her account quickly drew thousands of followers. The attention, particularly from male viewers offering compliments and persistent messages, temporarily raised her self-esteem and made her feel noticed. She actively engaged followers and encouraged interaction, crafting an online persona that seemed confident, vibrant, and bold. Behind that image, however, she was experiencing a deep internal crisis. As her dependency worsened, her posts became irregular and increasingly disorganized. She began appearing on camera in loungewear and often showed visible emotional exhaustion. Concerned viewers left worried comments, but she usually did not respond. After Natalie's death and lacking external support, she gradually sank into a life dominated by substance dependence and online performance. Outwardly, it could look like rebuilding her life, but in reality, it was a form of escape. This period led up to events that later attracted widespread attention. By early 2023, Winter was in a state of social and psychological instability. No steady income, ongoing substance use, and frequent nights spent in other people's homes. During this time, she met Stuart, an older man living alone in Andover. They were introduced by a mutual acquaintance involved in informal circles of substance users. People who knew Stuart described him as trusting and generous. When Winter said she had lost her housing and feared threats that prevented her return, Stuart offered her temporary shelter. She moved in and brought her dog. Stuart welcomed oblivion and helped care for him. At first, their household seemed calm. Winter cooked, chatted, and helped with chores, behaviors that suggested gratitude for being taken in. But the dynamic gradually changed. Winter began to involve herself in parts of Stuart's life that went beyond any agreed arrangement. Meanwhile, Stuart's contact with his family declined. His sons and former spouse became worried when his spending rose and his regular communication slowed. When they raised concerns, Stuart said he was simply helping someone in need. He did not respond to criticism, and attempts to speak with him were often intercepted or blocked by Winter. Over time, Winter took over Stuart's finances and personal affairs. She completed his benefits paperwork, used his bank cards, and made many purchases, often for her own needs. Although she presented these actions as support and assistance, they effectively gave her total control over his life. In the final weeks of Stuart's life, he became completely dependent on someone he trusted. During that time, there was no record of him acting aggressively or making threats. In the early hours of June 2023, events at Stuart's home triggered one of the most widely discussed criminal investigations in recent years. According to investigators, an argument broke out that evening between Stuart and Winter. Winter later said the dispute began because she believed Stuart had given her dog to strangers. That claim proved false when the dog was found unharmed in the house. After the argument, Winter escalated the situation. Forensic evidence showed she inflicted multiple stab wounds to Stuart's back, chest, and neck. Defensive wounds on his hands indicate he tried to protect himself. When he could no longer resist, she used a handbag strap to restrict his breathing. The medical cause of death was a combination of blood loss and mechanical asphyxiation. Winter did not leave the scene. She covered Stuart's body with a white sheet, turned a fan directly on the area where he lay, and remained in the house for several days. That same night, she invited a recent acquaintance inside. Despite the presence of the body, the two reportedly used prohibited substances together and recorded video. The next day, they left town and traveled to Birmingham, where they remained in hiding for 5 days. Stuart's body was discovered on June 28, 2023, after a neighbor reported his prolonged absence. On June 30, Winter was arrested without resistance. The man who was with her at arrest was not involved in the killing. He was briefly questioned on secondary charges related to unauthorized use of Stuart's bank cards and then released. Investigators collected extensive evidence: surveillance footage, videos from Winter's TikTok account, handwritten notes, audio recordings, letters, and digital communications. Authorities concluded the killing was premeditated. Prosecutors presented the full body of evidence at the 2024 trial. In court, the defense changed tack. Winter alleged she had been threatened, manipulated, and that Stuart had violated her boundaries. Those claims were unsupported by medical records or prior complaints. Her post-incident letters made no mention of mistreatment. Instead, those writings conveyed degradation of the victim and attempts at self-justification. Pre-incident videos also contradicted her story. Stuart appeared calm, showed no signs of aggression, and responded to her confrontational questions with confusion. The court found that Winter acted deliberately, motivated by personal gain and internal hostility. She was convicted of intentionally causing death under aggravating circumstances and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. After at least 23 years, the sentencing statement underscored the manipulative and calculated nature of her conduct and rejected any claim of self-defense. The court also noted attempts to exploit the incident for personal publicity. The dog found at the scene was rehomed and, according to animal welfare authorities, has adjusted well. Stuart Maxwell Crocker's funeral was private. His sons and former spouse delivered heartfelt tributes, remembering him as kind, generous, and always willing to help others, and noting that his trusting nature contributed to the tragedy. The case drew wide public attention because of the social media elements, the apparent lack of remorse, and the calculated nature of the crime. On the night of March 5, 1994, a young woman was walking alone on a deserted road near her university. Hours later, at dawn, a railroad worker discovers a strange object on the side of the tracks. The naked, bloody body of a young woman. That girl was Stephanie Hummer, 18 years old, talented, full of dreams, just starting her college journey. But the dream ended in the darkness after only a few short steps back to her dormitory. Who was following Stephanie that night? Who had the heart to turn an ordinary evening into an irreparable tragedy? This is more than just a murder. This has been a long and 12-year journey, where justice was tested, trust eroded, and the truth only revealed itself when technology and time forced the murderer into the light. Stay tuned until the end, because what you are about to hear is not just a crime, but a lingering ghost that has haunted an entire community for more than a decade. Stephanie Hummer was born on August 4, 1975, in a close-knit small town called Finneytown, Ohio. The town had about 10,000 residents. She was the eldest child. Her parents also had two sons, Jeff and Tony. Her parents worked hard to give their children a stable, loving home, and the family grew up in an atmosphere of mutual support. Stephanie became known for her academic achievements. She was the kind of student who mastered difficult material easily and often helped classmates who were falling behind. But she did not spend all her free time studying. She had many friends, enjoyed socializing, and liked meeting new people. She loved music and played the viola, and she was active in school sports, participating on the soccer and softball teams. Her creativity, initiative, and energy led her to work on the yearbook. She became its editor in her senior year, and many people praised her articles. Stephanie always planned to go to college and worked hard to reach that goal. She earned a prestigious scholarship that required being among the top students in her school. Her father was particularly proud. He had once received the same scholarship and understood how difficult it was to obtain. She graduated high school in 1993 and enrolled at Ohio State University in Columbus. The large campus, with about 50,000 students from diverse backgrounds, felt like a small city and offered many opportunities. Ohio State was known for strong programs in engineering, architecture, science, and business. Stephanie, supported by her scholarship and intellectual abilities, fit in well. At first, she enjoyed the university's competitive spirit and the chance to meet new people. She quickly found a close group of friends and appreciated the lively student atmosphere. In class, she remained focused, and outside class, she spent time socializing. It took Stephanie some time to find the right major. She changed her direction several times before deciding on landscape design, which let her combine creative, analytical, and artistic skills. From her first year, she threw herself into her studies, but academics were not her only interest. Like many students, Stephanie attended parties and social gatherings. She lived in dormitory housing under a scholarship contract, in an off-campus apartment about 300 meters from the campus's main road, a convenient location that made owning a car unnecessary. Her roommates were 19 years old Tracy and 20 years old Kaylee. The three lived together through the winter into early March 1994. As the cold weather began to ease and students eagerly anticipated spring break, on Saturday, March 5, 1994, Stephanie planned to meet her family. Her family came to town because her younger brother Tom was taking part in the Math Olympiad. The family had lunch together, and Stephanie described life in her dorm, which was lively that week. That evening, after her family left, Stephanie stayed with friends Evelyn and Harper. They spent time with a group of young men who visited their apartment, Thomas Pomeroy and Thomas Smith, both acquaintances from school. Pomeroy was popular, but had a poor reputation, while Smith was quieter and more reserved. After a few hours together, the young men invited Stephanie and the others to a party at their place, and everyone agreed. As the night went on, the group left and walked 4 blocks south to the dorm where Pomeroy and Smith lived. They moved along quiet streets, passing only occasional small clusters of students. Immediately after arriving, Stephanie said she was tired and wanted to go back to the dormitory to sleep. She needed a good night's rest because she had plans for Sunday. The others stayed out later to continue having fun, and Stephanie went back alone. No one saw her alive again. The next day, March 6, a train driver who was inspecting the tracks a few kilometers from the campus noticed something in the bushes. The area was secluded and normally deserted, except for the occasional train. At first he thought it might be a mannequin, but when he approached, he realized it was the body of a naked girl, lying face down. He called the police immediately. When officers arrived, it was clear the girl had died from multiple blunt force injuries to the head. She was wearing nothing but socks and shoes, so investigators initially believed the attack may have been the result of abuse. The area near the tracks was known for a run-down neighborhood with many brothels, so it was not unheard of for bodies to be found there. The victim was initially believed to be a call girl murdered by a client. A closer look, however, cast doubt on that theory. Detectives found that she did not have the appearance of a woman working in the area, but looked like a student at the university, which was only about 10 minutes away. There were no identification items found with the body, so identifying the victim became the immediate priority while forensic teams processed the scene. Back at the hostel where Stephanie had lived, morning came, and her roommates did not notice her absence right away. They assumed she was sleeping after a long day. Because they had plans together, the roommates checked her room around 11 o'clock a.m. and found it empty, but still did not raise an alarm. Neighbors figured she might have stayed overnight with a friend. Later, that explanation proved unlikely. Stephanie had only recently moved to town. I had few friends, no romantic relationships, and had planned to return to the dorm that night to rest. By afternoon, after calling everyone they could think of and failing to reach Stephanie, her roommates contacted her family, hoping she might be with them. That call immediately alarmed her parents, who did not know where she was or who she had been with at the university. Lacking local contacts or numbers, they went to the police station. Living more than 100 kilometers from Columbus, they were largely dependent on remote updates, while Stephanie's parents waited anxiously for news. Police searched the Columbus area and then widened the search, but found nothing at first. Later, a neighboring station reported that a girl's body had been found on the railroad. Comparing the evidence, investigators concluded the victim could be 18 years old, Stephanie Hummer. The police contacted the family and asked them to come to the morgue to identify the body. That call was the most terrifying the parents had ever received. When they saw the body, they recognized their daughter. The missing person investigation was immediately reclassified as a murder investigation. The detectives interviewed Stephanie's friends Evelyn and Harper, who had been with her late the evening she disappeared. They were completely cooperative and said nothing unusual happened at the party. Midway through the night, Stephanie told them she was very tired and went home by herself. Neither friend expected this to be the last time they'd see her alive. The neighborhood felt safe. They often walked home alone from parties without problem. Evelyn watched Stephanie leave through a window. Evelyn said Stephanie took a shortcut through the industrial area behind the residential buildings to cut her walk almost in half. This became a crucial lead. The police could now search that route for evidence or witnesses. The industrial zone looked like an ideal place to ambush someone. Poor lighting, limited visibility, and a nearby bar. A thorough search turned up nothing. Detectives questioned locals whose windows faced the area and spoke with bar patrons and employees, but no one reported seeing anything. Early in the investigation, male students who had been at the party were treated as potential suspects. Since intoxicated attendees could have attacked Stephanie, the autopsy showed she died of multiple blunt force blows to the head and had a bruise on her neck. Forensics determined the neck mark was likely a kiss. Investigators collected a saliva smear from it. Evidence also suggests abuse. All biological materials were sent to the lab to build DNA profiles. The medical examiner estimated Stephanie died between 3:00 a.m. and 6:00 a.m. Stephanie had no known enemies. Initial suspicion focused on two young men who were with Stephanie, Thomas Pomeroy and Thomas Smith, and her friends before and during the party. The theory was that one might have slipped away, followed Stephanie through the deserted route, and attacked her. One of those men, Thomas Pomeroy, attracted attention because he had bandages on his head and arm. He said he was injured that evening while walking with his girlfriends. Evelyn and Harper's accounts matched his story. Realizing there was collusion, detectives asked Pomeroy and Smith to take a lie detector test. They agreed, passed, and voluntarily provided DNA samples. When DNA from the kiss mark on Stephanie's neck matched Smith, investigators re-interviewed him. He admitted that although he and Stephanie were not in a relationship, they had kissed on Saturday night before she left. He said he never saw her again and denied attacking her. Semen analysis collected after the assault did not match Smith's DNA, nor did it match any profile in the police database. After this setback, the investigation slowed. The police lacked legal grounds and resources to test DNA from all university students. Screening tens of thousands of people was impractical. Several days passed with no identified suspect. With leads exhausted, university security was tightened. The 5 campus guards had their patrol areas expanded and received stricter instructions. The case attracted public attention, and 2 Ohio businessmen offered a $5,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. But the reward yielded no new leads. In April 1994, a new lead surfaced. Police focused on a young man named Michael Barnhart, arrested for attempting to kidnap a college student. His methods resembled the attack on Stephanie. However, when his DNA was compared to the killer's profile, it did not match. Soon after, an anonymous caller contacted the police about a friend named Anthony. He claimed that, days after Stephanie's murder, Anthony had described in detail how he killed her. The caller agreed to record a phone conversation to obtain a confession, which succeeded. Anthony was brought in for questioning but changed his story, saying it was a tasteless joke meant to get attention. He voluntarily gave a DNA sample, which did not match, and he was removed from the suspect list. Following this setback, the FBI joined the investigation, generating new leads and identifying key witnesses. One reported seeing a suspicious white van without license plates near the crime scene on the night of the murder. The van, a typical work vehicle, was traced to a local industrial complex and driven by a man named Rodney Hastings. Rodney had a troubling criminal history, including a prior kidnapping conviction. He was released in 1983 and had no further recorded offenses, meaning no DNA was on file. He also worked close to where Stephanie's body was found. A co-worker reported that he had a peculiar way of approaching female students, using a work van and pretending to be an undercover police officer. She had never heard of him intending to abuse or kidnap, but he still seemed like a suspicious suspect. police obtained a search warrant for a relative's official vehicle that Rodney had been using. Inside, they found handcuffs, a flashlight, a gun, and fake police identification. During questioning, Rodney invoked his right to remain silent and refused a polygraph. Detectives believed they were on the right track. They collected his DNA and sent it to the lab. The results were negative. No connection to Stephanie. Rodney later attempted to file a civil rights lawsuit over the investigation, but it failed. He appeared to harbor deep resentment toward law enforcement after his previous imprisonment. Weeks went by without progress. Stephanie's parents turned to the media, appealing to the public for help and information, but no new leads emerged. Months passed. In the winter of 1995, police focused on Charles Rathbun, arrested for the murder of model Linda Sobeck. He lived near where Stephanie was found and had attended the same university in his youth. Charles claimed he accidentally ran over Linda and buried her out of fear. However, a forensic examination determined that she had been abused before her death. At first, the similarities between Linda's case and Stephanie's seemed very compelling, but subsequent DNA testing ruled Charles out as Stephanie's attacker. For years, there was no progress. The most valuable piece of evidence remained, the DNA collected from Stephanie's body. Detectives believed that advances in technology, or a future offense by the perpetrator, would eventually identify her killer. The attacker's DNA profile was regularly compared against databases, but no matches appeared. That changed only in 2005, when new laws required collecting DNA from all convicted offenders, including those convicted of non-violent crimes. On January 2, 2006, a call came into the Columbus Police Department. The detective originally assigned to Stephanie's murder had retired, and his replacement picked up. The caller reported a DNA database match tied to Stephanie Hummer's case. The new detective told the retired investigator, who had carried Stephanie's photo in his wallet for years. Shocked, the retired detective requested a retest, which confirmed the match. The DNA pointed to Jonathan Gravely, a Columbus resident. He had lived near campus before Stephanie enrolled, and, even after the case went cold, never left the area. In his youth, Jonathan had been a popular university athlete in track and football. He was 24 at the time of Stephanie's murder and had no prior violent record. Even after the attack, there were no violent offenses on his record, which raised questions. His personal life appeared stable. Married in 1994, 2 children, later divorced, then remarried with 2 more children. He held a well-paying job at a local manufacturing company and seemed like a typical, successful middle-class man. Yet he had a number of minor legal issues. Jonathan had been arrested 17 times for non-violent offenses, including charges related to banned substances and alcohol, as well as traffic violations. In 2006, at age 35, he came to authorities' attention again for missing a child support payment, leading to a charge of child support evasion. Under new legislation, this required him to submit a DNA sample, which entered the database and matched the evidence in Stephanie's case within 5 weeks. On January 12, 2006, detectives went to his workplace and brought him in for questioning. From the outset, Jonathan appeared nervous. Detectives believed they had their suspect. He admitted to knowing Stephanie, but claimed they had an intimate relationship after meeting at a local bar, then broke up. Despite the DNA match, he denied involvement in her murder. Detectives challenged his story. Stephanie wasn't yet 21 and, according to friends who were with her earlier, I wasn't planning to visit any bars that night. She had been exhausted and took a shortcut home, in a hurry. The bar narrative didn't fit. As the interview continued, Jonathan's account shifted. He later claimed that they met on the street, were immediately attracted to each other, and became intimate. He then said they argued afterward when Stephanie allegedly threatened to tell his wife, and, angered, he chased her and struck her several times, not realizing she would die. His claims conflicted with each other and with known facts. Police believed a different sequence. Jonathan was at a bar in an industrial area, saw Stephanie walking home alone, and targeted her. He pulled up in his car and either offered a ride that she accepted or forced her in. Then he assaulted and abused her. Stephanie escaped, but to avoid being identified, he caught up with her and beat her to death. After hours of interrogation, Jonathan confessed to that version of events. He was charged with the murder of Stephanie Hummer. For Stephanie's family, the end of their 12-year search for justice has brought profound relief. Jonathan's bail was set at $1 billion, justified by his ability to evade detection for so long. He could not pay and remained in custody until trial. Jonathan's attorney joined the case and advised him to withdraw his earlier statements. Jonathan then recanted his confession during an interview with detectives, claiming it had been made under duress. His defense emphasized his positive character. He appeared to be a respectable, successful family man, someone seemingly incapable of a violent crime. However, DNA evidence conclusively linked him to the attack. Even his wife of the past 4 years defended him, saying he had only had a consensual relationship with Stephanie and nothing more. She rejected law enforcement's claims, insisting that anyone who truly knew Jonathan would attest to his decency and that he could not be so cruel. She said he had never raised his voice to her or laid a hand on her throughout their relationship. Despite the defense's efforts and supporting testimony, Jonathan was convicted of murder. Facing the death penalty, his lawyer filed an appeal. Prosecutors then offered him a deal. If he pleaded guilty to murder, they would drop the abuse charges. He accepted, admitting to the murder, which made him eligible for a life sentence instead of capital punishment. At the final hearing, he apologized to Stephanie Hummer's family. He received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The court's decision, which the family considered too lenient, enraged Stephanie's relatives. Although her mother had died in 2015 before the trial concluded, Stephanie's father refused to give up. He spoke to the media, expressing his outrage and vowing to fight to ensure Jonathan Gravely is imprisoned for the rest of his life. He was a polite, clean-cut truck driver with neatly ironed shirts and glasses, the kind of man no one would ever suspect. But hidden behind the cab of his rig was a torture chamber of chains, clamps, and whips, all of which catered to his sick interests. Authorities believe he may have killed more than 50 women. Among them was Regina K. Walters, an innocent 14-year-old girl whose final moments Robert captured on film inside a desolate barn. The photo would later become one of the most haunting images in the history of American crime. Regina K. Walters was born in 1975, and she grew up with her older brother, Brian. From an early age, she dreamed of escaping Texas, of traveling across America to visit bustling cities, and, if she were lucky, even venturing to other countries. By the age of 14, she was determined to make those dreams come true. At the end of 1989, she met an 18-year-old named Ricky Lee Jones, 4 years her senior. Regina and Ricky are deeply in love. It was a strong, passionate, all-consuming first love. They constantly talked about leaving Texas, perhaps for California or Mexico, wanting to erase their pasts and start anew together. They didn't know what they would do for a living, but they knew they couldn't stay in their hometown. At home, Regina's family was weighed down by grief. Her parents had divorced, and she lived with her mother, who was still struggling to keep the household stable. Ricky, meanwhile, was described by local residents as a quiet, kind young man who kept to himself. He had grown up in foster care after his biological parents lost their rights. His adoptive parents often humiliated and insulted him, which fueled his desire to leave Pasadena as soon as possible. Ricky also had a prior conviction for theft and was on probation. meaning he couldn't simply leave the city without facing consequences. On the night of February 3, 1992, Regina and Ricky decided to take the risk. Backpacks on their shoulders, they left their homes, met on the street, and headed toward the highway. Neither of them had a car or a driver's license, so they planned to hitchhike to California. They were overwhelmed with a mix of emotions, fear of the unknown combined with a feeling of complete freedom and joy that their long-held dream of leaving their hometown was finally coming true. On the morning of February 4, Regina's mother, Carolyn, woke up and went to her daughter's room to wake her, only to find it empty. She went to Brian's room and asked about Regina. Brian replied that he didn't know anything. He had been asleep all night and hadn't heard or seen anything. Carolyn called her brother, hoping Regina was visiting her uncle. But she wasn't there either. After searching Regina's room and realizing that most of her belongings were missing, Carolyn went to the police station and filed a missing persons report. The officers immediately began searching for Regina. Relatives posted flyers all over the city. And soon, the police received a call. A witness reported seeing Regina near the highway, walking along the side of the road with a slightly older young man. Regina's family knew about Ricky, and it became clear that their daughter had run away with him. Some even suspected that the adult Ricky had stolen Regina. Early in the morning of February 4, Ricky and Regina walked along the highway, waving at passing cars in the hope that someone would give them a ride to California. No one stopped. The couple continued walking, their heavy backpacks weighing them down. Suddenly, a truck honked, and the driver gestured for them to come over. The truck slowed and stopped on the side of the road. Ricky and Regina hurried to the cab. Seeing enough room for both of them, they asked the driver for a ride. The driver was a tall, thin, middle-aged man with glasses and thinning hair. He wore perfectly ironed clothes, a cotton shirt and trousers, and looked harmless enough. Polite and friendly, he introduced himself as Dusty. He opened the passenger door and invited the young travelers into the cab. The interior of the truck was impeccably clean and smelled pleasant. The radio played softly. Dusty, Ricky, and Regina set off down the highway. Regina and Ricky were well aware that they were likely already being sought. They understood that if they were caught, they would be in serious trouble. But even greater danger awaited them in that perfectly clean truck, which concealed a secret compartment behind the cab, a real torture chamber. A month and a half passed, and the police hadn't found a single clue about Regina and Ricky's disappearance. They did not receive any calls or letters. No one had seen them anywhere. On March 17, the phone rang at Regina's father Jerry Walters' house. Only his relatives and a few close friends knew his number. Jerry picked up the phone and was surprised to hear an unknown male voice on the other end. The stranger said that he knew where Regina was, then added, "Now, she has a short haircut." He left her in the attic of the barn. Then the line was cut off. Jerry tried to call back, but the number was no longer available. He contacted the Pasadena police and reported the strange, frightening call. The officers gave Jerry a tape recorder and asked him to record all such calls. The police also gave Regina's mother, Carolyn, a tape recorder, just in case, and asked her to record any calls from a stranger as well. The next day, late in the evening, the phone rang at Carolyn's house. She answered, and a male voice asked if Carolyn had found her daughter in the attic of the barn. He then suggested that they should meet early in the morning near the 24-hour store close to her house in town. In the morning, Carolyn went to the meeting place, but no one approached her. She said that maybe the stranger got scared because a patrol car had accidentally parked near the meeting place. A few days later, the stranger called Carolyn again and made another appointment. This time, there was no patrol car nearby. Police watched what was happening from an unmarked vehicle. Carolyn waited for 2 hours, but again, no one came to the meeting. Over the next 2 weeks, the mysterious stranger called Carolyn several more times. She recorded all the conversations. It was always the same voice. Mostly, the stranger talked nonsense, shouted, sometimes spoke of depraved things, and insisted on another meeting. The police tried to trace the addresses from which these strange calls were being made. It turned out that the unknown man always called from different locations scattered across a wide area. Determining his exact position was impossible. And after a few weeks, around the beginning of April, the calls suddenly stopped. The frightening stranger gave neither the parents nor the police any peace of mind. One would like to believe that this was just the evil prank of some disturbed person. But the fact that Regina's father's number was not listed in any phone book made it clear that most likely the stranger had learned Jerry's number from Regina herself, and this was indeed the truth. The strange man who had been calling Jerry and Carolyn for weeks had not lied. It was because of him that Regina and Ricky had disappeared. His name was Robert Ben Rhodes, and he was one of the most terrifying criminals America has ever known. Robert was born on November 22, 1945, in Council Bluffs, Iowa. Robert's father, Ben, served in the United States Army, and Robert and his siblings were raised primarily by their mother, Rowena. By all accounts, they were a normal family. Robert was close to his mother, loved her dearly, and received love in return. However, everything began to change dramatically when his father returned from the Army. Ben had changed significantly during his years of service. His mental health had suffered. Back home, he behaved as if he were still in a military camp, issuing curt orders and demanding immediate obedience. Eventually, the Rhodes family was given a large, spacious house as their property. Ben secured a job as a fireman. In the eyes of the public, he was a respected, fair, and decent man. Robert also loved his father and considered him a real hero. Robert was a good student, played sports, and even took vocal lessons. He had several friends. It is known that at the ages of 16 and 18, Robert committed 2 minor offenses. At 16, he damaged someone's car, and at 18, he was involved in a street fight. Overall, Robert seemed like an ordinary young man until his life changed dramatically at 18. When he finished high school, that same year, his father was arrested for child abuse. Ben posted bail and was released, but just 2 months later, he was arrested again for a similar crime. Once more, he posted bail. But before the case could go to trial, Ben shot himself in the head. The man Robert once admired as a hero turned out to be a monster. When Robert's father died, he realized that his life in Council Bluffs would now become unbearable. He feared that everyone would gossip and whisper about his family. His emotional state deteriorated, and he decided to enlist in the U.S. Marine Corps. But after 3 years of service, Robert was dishonorably discharged after being caught red-handed during a robbery. Over the next few years, Robert constantly changed jobs, struggling to find a place for himself. Eventually, he returned to his hometown, where locals still looked down on his family. At 22, Robert met a woman and married for the first time. They had a son. At the same time, Robert enrolled in college, combining studies with work, though he still didn't know what he wanted to do with his life. He only knew that he was increasingly fascinated by violence and by BDSM fantasies. In 1972, at the age of 25, Robert decided to change everything. He quit his job, withdrew from college, and divorced his wife. Determined never to return to his hometown, he tried to join the police, but failed the entrance exam. Once again, he drifted between jobs in warehouses, stores, offices, and restaurants. 3 years later, in 1973, Robert moved to Houston, Texas, where he found work as a truck driver. It was during this time that he became heavily involved and joined the local BDSM community. He especially enjoyed whips and chains. At these clubs, everything took place under rules of mutual consent, with partners free to stop at any moment. Robert soon met another woman and entered his second marriage. His wife later revealed that Robert always insisted on domination during their encounters and that they attended BDSM parties together. At one point, when she was hospitalized with lupus, Robert openly admitted that he continued attending parties and intimate with other women. Their marriage ended in divorce in the early 1982. Later, Robert met a woman who would become his third and last wife. Her name was Deborah. They met in a bar, where Robert wore a perfectly ironed white shirt and black pants. Introducing himself as Dusty, he claimed to be an airline pilot traveling the world. They began dating. Several months passed before she discovered his real name and learned that he was not a pilot at all, but an ordinary truck driver. It was a disappointment, but by then, she had already fallen deeply in love with him and decided to stay. 4 years later, in 1987, they married. Deborah moved in with Robert, bringing her son and daughter from a previous marriage. Gradually, Robert introduced Deborah to swing clubs and BDSM practices involving whips, chains, and elaborate paraphernalia. They attended intimate parties together and sometimes exchanged partners. On more than one occasion, Deborah walked into a room and found Robert in the middle of an intimate act with another woman in a dominant role. Over time, Deborah grew to dislike his obsessions. Robert became increasingly harsh, while his demands pushed past all acceptable boundaries. One day, Deborah came home from work and found Robert in the living room with a strange man. Robert said this was a gift he bought for her. Deborah was horrified. She rejected the gift and was shaken by the encounter. In the following months, their relationship grew cold, and the distance between them widened. After 2 years of marriage, Deborah divorced Robert in 1989. From that point on, Robert never again entered a long-term, serious relationship with a woman. In the late 1982, Robert continued working in cargo transportation. Employed by a company called Georgie, he drove across the country, visiting nearly every corner of America. Colleagues and acquaintances described him as intelligent and seemingly decent, though also cunning. It was known that Robert frequently picked up hitchhikers, expecting intimate favors in return for a ride. At first, nothing seemed unusual when Robert picked up a passenger. He appeared like a polite, clean-cut driver, neat and friendly. Sometimes he would even buy his passenger a meal, maybe a burger and a Coca-Cola, creating the impression of generosity and care. But the farther his truck traveled from populated areas, the stranger Robert became. He described corpses of girls supposedly found in dumpsters along highways. He rambled about a mysterious secret society whose members laughed at death. Whether such a society ever existed is doubtful. Eventually, when they reached a deserted stretch of road, Robert would pull over, take out a knife, and order his passenger into the back of the truck. Hidden there was a secret compartment, a torture chamber equipped with chains, clamps, clothespins, needles, and other sadistic tools. He would restrain his victims, lock them inside, then return calmly to the driver's seat and continue his route as if nothing had happened. During stops in remote areas, Robert would enter the compartment and unleash his darkest fantasies. What happened in that space was too gruesome to detail fully. Victims were often held for weeks, forced to endure humiliations like drinking their own urine or having their hair cut off so Robert could keep it as a personal trophy. He thrived on their screams. The louder the cries, the more aroused he became. Over time, his treatment of captives grew increasingly cruel. Eventually, when a victim no longer provoked the emotions he craved, he disposed of her. Most often, Robert killed his victims, but in rare instances, he allowed them to escape. One such case occurred in the summer of 1985, when a young girl named Vanessa Veselka accepted a ride in Robert's truck. She was just 15. 6 weeks earlier, Vanessa had run away from her abusive mother in New York, leaving with her 21-year-old boyfriend. Their relationship soon ended, and Vanessa was left completely alone, with only $60 in her wallet. At a truck stop, she met Robert, who offered her a free ride. He seemed normal enough at first, giving her no immediate reason to worry. But as they drove along a forested highway, Robert suddenly pulled over. He produced a hunting knife and ordered her into the back. Terrified, Vanessa began to cry, pleading with him to let her go. She swore she wouldn't go to the police, that no one would ever know. When she looked into his eyes, she froze in horror. His face was calm but unnervingly methodical. Then, in a flat voice, he uttered just one word. "Run." Vanessa bolted into the forest, sprinting wildly without looking back. Certain he might be chasing her, she dove into a cluster of branches and hid, covering her mouth with her shirt to stifle her panicked breathing. Minutes later, she heard the sound of the truck's engine starting. Robert drove away. She remained hidden until nightfall, trembling in shock, before finally making her way to the roadside and catching a ride home. Vanessa returned to her mother's house, but never revealed what had happened. She didn't call the police either. Sadly, others who crossed paths with him would not be so fortunate. Among those who were less fortunate were newlyweds Douglas Scott Ziskowski, 26, and Patricia Candace Walsh, 24. They lived in Seattle, and in November 1989, they decided to celebrate their honeymoon by attending a religious seminar in Georgia. Without a car, they viewed hitchhiking as a fun adventure. But shortly after leaving home, all contact with Douglas and Patricia ceased. A month later, family and friends grew worried. Investigators discovered that the couple had last been seen in El Paso, Texas. With little time left to reach Georgia, they had likely been traveling along the interstate when they encountered Robert, who offered them a ride. Barely an hour into the trip, Robert pulled over, produced a gun, and forced them out of the vehicle. He shot Douglas in the head and left his body in the woods. Patricia was chained inside his truck's hidden compartment for about a week as he continued driving west. Eventually, in Utah, Robert led her away from the road and executed her. Another of Robert's victims was 18-year-old Shayna Holtz, a California native planning to travel to Arkansas. At a truck stop, she met Robert and offered her a ride to Texas. Shayna accepted, but soon after the journey began, he handcuffed her and forced her into the back of his truck. For hours, Robert tormented her, even cutting her hair short before locking her inside again. He tied her neck and mouth with horsehair to silence her screams. When delivering cargo, he turned up the radio so no one could hear what was happening inside the trailer. After about a week, Robert grew strangely comfortable with Shayna, even allowing her to sit in the passenger seat beside him, completely naked. Then, after 2 harrowing weeks, Shayna seized her chance. She bolted from the truck and ran screaming along a busy road until witnesses stopped to help. Police were called. Shayna reported that she had been kidnapped by a man named Dusty. She described the truck in detail and gave the name of the transport company he worked for. Investigators quickly traced the company's records and identified Dusty as Robert Ben Rhodes. Robert was brought to the station for a lineup that included him and 4 other men. Though Shayna's earlier description matched him perfectly, she appeared extremely frightened and insisted that her attacker was not present. Officers realized she was too frightened to point him out. Still, they carefully documented Robert's name, address, and employer, certain they would hear of him again. That certainty came just months later. On the morning of April 1, 1990, a state trooper noticed a suspiciously parked truck near Casa Grande, Arizona, climbing onto the running board to peer inside. He was horrified to see a naked young woman chained to the wall. The girl spotted the officer and began screaming. The trooper drew his weapon and demanded the driver step out. Robert tried to stall, hiding briefly in the cab, but soon surrendered. The woman, Katie Ford, was rescued and rushed to a hospital. She recounted that Robert had held her captive for several days, torturing her in the secret compartment, chillingly boasted that he had been doing the same thing for over 15 years. When questioned, 45-year-old Robert claimed Katie was just an escort he had picked up, that everything had been consensual. He insisted she was lying and mentally unstable. Despite his denials, he was arrested and formally charged with kidnapping, assault, and harassment. Then, the Arizona officer contacted Robert's employer and learned that this same driver had recently been linked to a similar case. Detectives conducted a meticulous search of Robert's truck, paying special attention to the hidden compartment. Inside, they discovered a camera. When the film was developed, it revealed dozens of disturbing photographs of young women. Meanwhile, Robert pleaded guilty in the case of Katie and was sentenced to 6 years for kidnapping. He was placed in a prison cell, but the investigation was far from over. Detectives were particularly interested in the photos of unidentified women and in Katie's testimony that Robert had claimed he'd been abducting victims for 15 years. Among the images, investigators identified one of the missing girl, Regina Walters. On September 29, 1990, 5 months after Robert's arrest, a local farmer in Illinois prepared to burn down his dilapidated barn. Before setting it alight, he checked the structure one last time. In the attic, he stumbled upon a human skeleton. Terrified, he alerted the police. Officers found wire wrapped tightly around the victim's neck. Dental records confirmed that the remains belonged to Regina Walters, who had vanished 7 months earlier. At first, investigators suspected Regina's boyfriend, Ricky Jones, but comparison between the barn crime scene and the photos from Robert's camera proved otherwise. The shots showed Ricky inside that truck, alive and terrified. Detectives concluded that Robert had killed Ricky the same way he had killed Douglas Iskov, by shooting him, and then forced Regina to travel across America, locked inside his secret truck compartment. Other truckers later recalled seeing Robert with a short-haired teenager in Chicago and assumed she was just another passenger, since she never openly resisted or tried to escape in front of witnesses. No one realized she was being held against her will. Regina had endured a month and a half in captivity before Robert took her to the barn, photographed her, and ended her life. A search of Robert's apartment in Houston, Texas, uncovered Regina's notebook and diary, filled with the phone numbers of her family and friends. This was discovered in May 1990, further linking him to her case. 2 years later, investigators overlaid Robert's trucking logs with the times and places of the mysterious phone calls Regina's parents had received. The match was exact. In 1992, to avoid the death penalty, Robert Ben Rhodes accepted a plea bargain and was sentenced to life in prison for Regina's murder. Later, ballistics evidence tied him to the killings of Douglas Ziskowski and Patricia Candace Walsh. Facing the possibility of execution again, he accepted another deal and received a second life sentence. In 2012, Vanessa, the girl who had once escaped Robert's truck at 15, finally came forward. She admitted that the guilt of her silence had haunted her for decades. She poured her pain into a memoir, telling her full story. Vanessa even reached out to Robert for an interview, but he coldly demanded $500 for his time. In 2015, law enforcement agencies released several photographs of unidentified women found on Robert's film, hoping the public could help identify them. One of the women, Pamela Milliken, came forward. She explained that back in 1985, while hitchhiking, she had been picked up by Robert. Almost immediately, he took out his camera and snapped her picture. Robert explained that he photographed all passengers in case they tried to rob him or run away. Pamela recalled a sign hanging in the cab that read something like, "Cash, weed, or intimate. No one rides for free." Since she had neither money nor drugs, Pamela said she ended up having consensual intimate with Robert during the ride. Afterward, he drove her safely to her destination and let her go. Pamela was one of the lucky ones. Today, Robert Ben Rhodes is 79 years old, serving his sentence at Menard Correctional Center, a maximum security prison in Chester, Illinois. Officially, he has been convicted of killing 3 people. Regina Walters, Douglas Jiskowski, and Patricia Walsh. But investigators are convinced the true number is far higher, based on his trucking routes, photographs, and testimony from survivors. Authorities believe Rohde's murdered over 50 women across the United States. Though officially, only 3 deaths have been proven. It is thought that he began his crimes in the mid-1970 seconds and continued for about 15 years. At the peak of his violence, Robert was attacking as many as 3 women a month, turning America's highways into his personal hunting ground. With a thirst for control and an obsession to keep his lover by his side at all costs, James Michael Ryan, a famous dentist, made an irreparable mistake. From a seemingly romantic, glamorous relationship, everything gradually turned into a deadly nightmare, where love was distorted into personal fear of possession, and care turned into chains. This story is not only a tragedy, but also a chilling warning. Where is the line between love and crime? Sarah Harris was born on December 5, 1996, in Rockville, Montgomery County, Maryland. She was the youngest of 4 children in the close-knit family of Tina Harris and Mark Harris. She grew up alongside her sisters, Victoria Alexandra Ladson and Rachel Catherine Elizabeth Harris, and her brother, Christopher Harris. From an early age, Sarah was independent and ambitious. She excelled academically, with a particular interest in biology and anatomy. And as a teenager, she set her sights firmly on a career in medicine. Her teachers considered her exceptionally gifted and predicted a brilliant future. Languages also came naturally to her. She became fluent in both French and Spanish, determined to support herself. Sarah got her first job at 14, working as a promotional assistant at a large toy store. She entertained young shoppers by dressing up as Disney princesses and other storybook characters. It was there that a modeling scout noticed her striking appearance, invited her to try modeling. She agreed. Soon, her career in the fashion industry began. With her striking looks, flawless figure, Sarah quickly landed photo shoots and signed several advertising contracts. Yet, despite her growing success, she never abandoned her dream of becoming a doctor. She continued to study hard, research colleges, and prepare for the next step in her education. Friends and acquaintances described Sarah as sociable, cheerful, and full of life. She had many interests, from painting and music to traveling and dance. Admired by many, she nevertheless stayed focused on her studies and work, rarely dating. In 2020, at just 23, Sarah won a state-level beauty pageant, earning the title of Miss Maryland Petite. By then, she was completing her university studies and had secured an internship at a well-regarded private dental clinic. It seemed she had it all: intelligence, beauty, and a bright future ahead. Rachel, Sarah's older sister and someone Sarah was very close to, later told investigators about hidden difficulties in Sarah's life that most people didn't know about. At just 14, around the time she got her first job and started making her own money, Sarah had secretly begun experimenting with different substances. At first, it was over-the-counter medications from the family's cabinet. Taken in large amounts or mixed together, they produced sensations she had never felt before. Around the same time, she fell in with an older crowd, a questionable group of acquaintances who helped her obtain stronger prescription drugs. Before long, Sarah developed anxiety, insomnia, recurring nightmares, and early signs of dependency. She fought through depression but still managed to succeed in school and hold down jobs. The only person who knows about her struggles is Rachel, who promised to keep the secret from their mother. Sadly, that silence would come at a terrible cost, leading to the tragedy that followed. By the time Sarah turned 18, her family insisted she seek professional help from a psychiatrist. Her loved ones had become increasingly concerned about her drastic mood swings. At times, she would burst out laughing, only to break down in tears moments later, or suddenly grow irritable and aggressive. It was unsettling, but even then her mother never suspected that her youngest daughter might be using controlled substances. She assumed Sarah's behavior was simply the result of stress and exhaustion. After a series of medical evaluations and consultations, Sarah was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. The diagnosis was officially confirmed, and she was prescribed medication to help stabilize her condition. At first, she followed the treatment plan, but she never stopped using the stronger substances she had already grown accustomed to. As a result, her dependency only deepened. In 2018, while still in college, Sarah attended a rock music festival in a neighboring state with her friends. There, she met a young man named Henry Peterson. The two felt an instant connection. The attraction was mutual, and after spending some time together, they exchanged numbers, determined to stay in touch. Despite her beauty and popularity, Sarah had little experience with serious relationships. Her bond with Henry became her first true love. He was nearly 7 years older. But the age gap didn't matter to either of them. They shared many interests, never ran out of things to talk about, and enjoyed each other's company. Still, there was a major obstacle: distance. Henry was a musician in a rock band who toured across the country. While Sarah couldn't leave her studies and part-time work, they only saw each other occasionally, whenever Henry could make the trip. Over time, the long stretches apart began to strain the relationship. For some time, they stayed together by talking on the phone and using social media. They made future plans, even discussed having children. But after about a year and a half, they mutually decided to part ways. It was Henry who initiated the breakup, worried about Sarah's unpredictable moods and struggles with dependency. Later, he admitted he still had strong feelings for her, but didn't see a future in a long-distance relationship given her challenges. Even after breaking up, they remained in touch. Sarah knew she could always call Henry if she needed support, and he would never turn her away. In 2020, Sarah visited a private dental clinic to have her wisdom teeth removed, as they were causing her significant discomfort. The procedure was complex and required several visits. She was fortunate to be treated by the clinic's owner, Dr. James Michael Ryan, a highly sought-after dentist whose schedule was typically booked months in advance. During her appointments, Sarah mentioned that she was a medical student actively seeking an internship. Ryan, without hesitation, offered her a part-time assistant position at his clinic. After some consideration, she accepted. Working at one of the most respected dental practices in the city seemed like the perfect way to launch her career. From the very beginning, Ryan seemed attentive and caring, even when Sarah was only his patient. He personally called to check on her recovery, asked about her well-being, reminded her of upcoming appointments. She appreciated the attention, trusted him, and respected him as a professional. Shortly after Sarah began working at the clinic, Ryan started showing clear signs of personal interest. He complimented her often and frequently invited her out. At first, Sarah had no intention of reciprocating his advances, especially considering he was nearly twice her age. Yet within a few months, their professional relationship evolved into something more intimate. By early 2021, they had decided to live together, moving into Ryan's luxurious home. At the time, he was 47 years old, divorced, with 3 adult children from his first marriage and a young son from a brief relationship with a former employee of his clinic. Well-established and financially secure, Ryan supported his ex-partner and their child, while also covering tuition for his children at prestigious universities. He was known as a charming and generous man. He had a reputation for being a ladies' man, someone who won women over with lavish gifts and grand gestures. Ryan's clinic was one of the most reputable and sought-after dental practices in Montgomery County, praised not only for high-quality care, but also for its cutting-edge cosmetic procedures. The services came at a steep price. But demand never waned thanks to its flawless reputation. When Sarah started dating Ryan, many of her friends envied her. To outsiders, it seemed like a perfect match. He showered her with expensive gifts, funded luxury vacations for her and her family, and even bought her a high-end car. What's more, after their relationship began, Sarah spent less and less time at the clinic, but continued receiving her salary. She enjoyed a life of travel, shopping, and leisure. On January 26, 2022, around 6 o'clock a.m., an anxious man called emergency services, reporting that his girlfriend was unresponsive and had likely overdosed. The caller identified himself as Dr. Flaz, James Ryan, explaining that he had already attempted to revive her with CPR, but failed. His voice trembled as he begged paramedics to arrive quickly while continuing his efforts. First responders reached the home within minutes, but it was too late. Sarah had died hours earlier. Her body was found on the living room floor. She bore no visible injuries or signs of trauma, but she appeared extremely frail and underweight. Ryan stood nearby, visibly distressed and in tears. He insisted that his partner had overdosed, though he couldn't explain exactly how it had happened. Investigators immediately considered three possible scenarios: intentional self-harm, an accidental overdose, or foul play. The last option was quickly set aside due to the lack of injuries or evidence of a struggle. Everything pointed to Sarah having consumed a lethal dose of powerful substances on her own. According to Ryan, the night before the tragedy, they had stayed up late, watching television together. Around midnight, Ryan said he had work the next morning and needed to sleep. Ryan went upstairs to bed, but Sarah chose to finish the movie and promised she would join him later. At about 5:30 a.m., Ryan woke up to find her still absent. He went downstairs and discovered her lying motionless on the floor beside the couch. She wasn't breathing, and thick white foam was coming from her mouth. As a trained medical professional, Ryan immediately went into action. He rolled Sarah onto her side, cleared her airway, and began CPR. For nearly 15 minutes, he alternated between chest compressions and mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but she never regained consciousness. Finally, realizing his efforts were futile, he called 911 to report the emergency. According to Ryan, Sarah may have consumed a dangerously high dose of a powerful anesthetic, mixing it with other medications, which ultimately caused her heart to fail. He admitted that Sarah had been secretly taking drugs from his clinic for personal use for quite some time. Although he was aware, he chose not to report her, fearing she would face legal repercussions. Instead, he insisted that he had done everything possible to help her manage her dependency within the privacy of their home. Ryan explained that he regularly administered IV drips to flush her system, reduce intoxication, and prevent dehydration. At the same time, he claimed he had been reaching out to specialists who could guide her toward proper rehabilitation, but he was desperate to keep the matter hidden from the public eye. Ryan said he first became aware of Sarah's problem shortly after she moved in with him. One evening, he walked in unexpectedly and caught her injecting herself intravenously. Startled, she confessed that she had been battling bipolar disorder, anxiety, and depression since her teenage years. Medications, she told him, were the only thing that helped her stay balanced and avoid a complete breakdown. For Ryan, the discovery was alarming, but instead of distancing himself, he chose to protect her. His account initially seemed credible. Toxicology results supported his statements, revealing that Sarah had indeed died from a lethal cocktail of several potent substances. The autopsy also showed no signs of physical assault or external trauma. However, her body revealed troubling details. Her veins bore heavy scarring, consistent with long-term IV use, and she appeared severely emaciated, weighing only 83 pounds at the time of her death. That same morning, Sarah's mother, Tina, was informed of the tragedy and given the details of James Ryan's version of events. But from the very first moment, Tina rejected his account entirely. Overcome with grief and suspicion, she directed her anger toward James, blaming him for her daughter's fate. She declared that she had never trusted him, even at the beginning of their relationship, claiming there was always something unsettling about him. Something predatory. Tina put forward her own narrative, one that painted a starkly different picture of James's role in Sarah's life. She recalled how, 2 years earlier, Sarah had visited his clinic to have her wisdom teeth surgically removed. From the very first consultation, Tina noticed the way the doctor looked at her daughter, not with the detached professionalism of a physician, but with the interest of a man. He quickly began calling Sarah outside of office hours, sending her messages, and making his attraction clear. When he discovered that she was seeking an internship, he offered her a lucrative position at his clinic, promising a generous salary and close supervision under his guidance. Sarah accepted the offer within weeks. From the start, Tina felt uneasy. She opposed the relationship and tried to confront her daughter, warning her about the dangers of getting involved with a much older man. Sarah brushed off her mother's concerns, insisting that her connection with James was purely professional. But over time, their relationship deepened, evolving beyond friendship into something more intimate. Despite Sarah's initial reluctance, as New Year's Eve 2021 approached, James invited Sarah to an upscale restaurant, where he presented her with an extravagant diamond ring worth a small fortune. That night, he declared his love for her, asked her to move in with him, and convinced her that they were meant to be together. Shortly after she agreed, he bought her a luxury Mitsubishi, solidifying his hold over her with material gifts. In Tina's eyes, James was never genuinely loved by her daughter. Rather, he had strategically bought Sarah's affection, showering her with lavish presents, granting her financial freedom, and even extending his generosity to her family. He financed vacations for Tina and her daughters, covering expenses, presenting himself as a devoted partner. To outsiders, it looked like devotion. To Tina, it was manipulation. She firmly believed that Sarah never truly reciprocated his feelings, and that James used his wealth to control and entrap her. Before long, James also discovered Sarah's greatest vulnerability: her dependency on controlled substances. When medications began to disappear from the clinic, he turned a blind eye. Terrified of losing her, James allowed the behavior to continue unchecked. In Tina's view, this wasn't love or compassion. It was proof that his control over Sarah ran far deeper than anyone realized, and it ultimately played a central role in her downfall. Sarah's mother was firmly convinced that James Ryan himself had been the one who introduced her daughter to injectable narcotics. She even recalled a deeply unsettling moment during a family trip to Hawaii. One evening, after drinking heavily, James allegedly confessed that he had first noticed Sarah years earlier at a toy store. At the time, she had been working there part-time, dressed as a princess to entertain children. She was only 15 years old. According to Tina, James admitted that even then, he was captivated by her beauty and had been obsessed with her ever since. Despite these troubling claims, authorities never conducted a full-scale search of James Ryan's home. Instead, they performed only a quick walkthrough. What they found seemed to support his version of events. Prescription medications were discovered in Sarah's purse, her bedside table, even in her car. Around the house, investigators noted discarded syringe wrappers, tourniquets, and IV fluid bottles, clear signs that she had been using injectable substances for some time. Several empty vials and ampoules were located near her body, and toxicology tests later confirmed that the same drugs were present in her system. The evidence suggested that Sarah had injected herself shortly before her death, that the fatal combination of medications had caused her collapse. Detectives also uncovered text messages on Sarah's phone, exchanged with her former boyfriend, Henry, with whom she had remained close friends. In her final messages, she opened up about her ongoing depression and hinted that she was considering ending her suffering. Investigators interpreted these words as a strong indication that Sarah had been contemplating end one's own life, and they concluded that she had carried it out. As a result, no criminal charges were filed. James's home was never officially designated as a crime scene, and he was released without consequence. Sarah's personal belongings, including her phone and laptop, were not seized for further examination. To law enforcement, the matter appeared settled, but Sarah's family refused to accept that conclusion. They remained convinced that James Ryan bore responsibility for her death. To them, the police had allowed a guilty man to walk free, and they feared he would never be held accountable. Determined to uncover the truth, Tina and her daughters resolved to conduct their own independent investigation. Tina returned to the police with additional testimony, describing the alarming changes she had seen in her daughter after she moved in with James. By the summer of 2021, Sarah had lost a striking amount of weight. Although she had always been slim due to her modeling, she now appeared gaunt and unwell. That October, James had taken Sarah and Tina on vacation to Florida. Despite the warm weather, Sarah insisted on wearing long sleeves, which Tina found suspicious. A few days after they returned, Sarah phoned her mother in a confused, almost incoherent state. Alarmed, Tina rushed to James's home and found her daughter barely conscious. For the first time, she noticed puncture marks on Sarah's arms. Scattered throughout the house were empty vials and ampules. Tina took photographs as evidence. Convinced James was involved in Sarah's substance use, she wanted to report him to police, but Sarah begged her not to. Sarah insisted that everything was under control, and even claimed James was helping her. To reassure her mother, she briefly agreed to move back home. But within days, she returned to James's house. On December 13, the situation repeated itself. Once again, Sarah called Tina in a disoriented state. When Tina arrived, she was horrified by what she saw. Sarah had grown dangerously thin, her arms riddled with injection marks. Beside the couch where she lay was an IV stand, and more vials and ampoules were scattered across the floor. Tina was told Sarah had simply received IV treatment for dehydration, but the sight left her shaken. She wanted to take Sarah home immediately, even by force, but her daughter threatened to sever all contact with her family if she tried. That heartbreaking day was the last time Tina saw her daughter alive. After Sarah's tragic passing, her mother and sister immediately took her phone and laptop, desperate to uncover the truth. They hoped to find proof that James had played a direct role in her decline. As they went through her messages, their worst fears were confirmed. Dozens of conversations between Sarah and James revolved around powerful medications, anesthetics, tranquilizers, and other controlled substances. In the final 6 months of her life, Sarah had barely been showing up at the clinic. She was under the influence most of the time, and James, unwilling for others to see her in such a state, kept her hidden. Yet, he continued financing her lifestyle, providing her with everything she wanted, including the very drugs she requested, just to ensure she wouldn't walk away from him. Sarah's sister painstakingly printed out every message that mentioned the substances. She compiled these conversations alongside the photographs their mother had secretly taken during her visits to Ryan's home. Armed with this evidence, they went to the police and demanded that a criminal case be opened against him for intentionally causing harm that led to Sarah's death. Though much of it was circumstantial, it was compelling enough for law enforcement to re-examine the case. The findings made it clear. James Michael Ryan had not only allowed Sarah to take medications from his clinic without permission, but he had also been actively supplying them to her. On March 22, 2022, authorities arrested Dr. James Ryan in connection with Sarah's death. During questioning, he admitted that he was aware of her dependency, but insisted that he had been doing his best to manage the situation. He claimed he tried to help her detox, administered IV fluids to prevent dehydration, and attempted to control her dosage. Yet, on the night Sarah died, he failed to intervene, and the consequences were fatal. After a long and closely watched trial, on August 25, 2023, James Ryan was found guilty of second-degree murder. The court ruled that as a medical professional, he could not have been unaware of the deadly risk he was exposing Sarah to. He was also convicted of unlawful possession of controlled substances. His sentence, 45 years in prison, with the possibility of parole only after serving 20 years. A wedding was supposed to be the start of a new life, but for Dawn Walker, it turned into a death sentence. On October 27, 2021, just hours after exchanging vows, the 52-year-old bride was brutally murdered by her new husband, Thomas Nutt, a man with a dark and violent past. In the house they had just returned to after their wedding reception. Why did she have to die on what should have been the happiest day of her life, and in what way? Let's find out together. Dawn was a loving mother to 3 children and a doting grandmother to 3 grandsons. Her family was the most important thing in her life. She lived in a 3-bedroom bungalow on Shirley Grove, where she quickly became part of the community. Known for selling Avon and Tupperware, Dawn used these opportunities to connect with neighbors and form friendships. Within weeks of moving in, she hosted a barbecue to introduce herself. That was typical Dawn, always reaching out, always eager to build bonds. Yet behind her bright smile, Dawn battled bipolar disorder and depression, struggles that affected her daily life, but never dimmed her warmth and generosity. Those who knew Dawn described her as having a beautiful soul. She was upbeat and full of energy, always putting others first. Dawn's daughter, Cody Shaw, remembered how Dawn once paid for a disabled man's groceries when he was short of money. It was a small gesture, but it perfectly captured her generous spirit. The close-knit Lightcliff community adored Dawn. After her death, neighbors raised £5,000 toward her funeral expenses, a testament to how loved and respected she was. In the months before her murder, some of those same neighbors had already grown worried about what they saw happening inside 33 Shirley Grove. Dawn met Thomas Nutt in late 2018 or early 2019. The relationship progressed at lightning speed, with Thomas moving in quickly. Dawn simply wanted someone to be with her and love her really. And that's when it started. Thomas, then 45, carried a long and violent history. His first conviction for grievous bodily harm came at the age of 17. In the 1,990 seconds, he served lengthy prison sentences for robberies. In the early 2000 seconds, he served 16 weeks in prison for deliberately hitting a woman's car in a traffic accident. Between 2005 and 2015, Thomas was in a relationship with Kimberly Olcock, whom he met at a traveling fairground in Radford, Nottingham. They had 3 children together, but the relationship was marred by a decade of escalating violence. For the first few years, Kimberly said Thomas Nutt was loving and never violent, but everything changed shortly after the birth of their first child. Just 2 days after giving birth, they argued over the baby's name. According to her testimony at Bradford Crown Court, Thomas simply went mad. He repeatedly punched her in the face, confiscated her phone, and kept her trapped inside the house. The abuse didn't stop there. Another serious attack followed in 2009. The final assault in 2015 revealed just how dangerous Thomas truly was. Kimberly recalled how he grabbed her throat while she lay in bed, strangling and punching her. He dragged her out of bed and continued choking her until she thought she would die. She said he hated women and had a dual personality. Sometimes he was charming and loving, but when angry, he became uncontrollably furious. Following the 2015 assault, Thomas was convicted, and Kimberly was granted a restraining order. Even then, his intimidation continued. While she was living in a safe house, He somehow managed to send her 3 smashed Easter eggs with the chilling message: when Dawn Walker began a relationship with Thomas, the warning signs were obvious. Her daughter, Kira Lee, was essentially pushed out of the family home at 18 after constant clashes with him. She recalled that Thomas openly disrespected women and treated men with more regard. The controlling behavior quickly escalated. Neighbors often overheard Dawn and Thomas arguing. In 2020, Kira came back from Egypt and found her mother, Dawn, ill. Thomas was yelling at Dawn, claiming she was only acting strangely because Kira was home. He followed Dawn upstairs, shouting at her the whole time. Kira couldn't take it anymore. She confronted him. His expression changed. His eyes widened. He pressed Dawn against the wall, grabbed her head and slammed it into a corner. By then, the violence toward Dawn had become undeniable. Another time, neighbors saw Dawn with a swollen black eye, cuts on her face, and badly bruised cheeks. In August 2020, another brutal attack happened. Police arrested Thomas, but Dawn later retracted her statement, leading to the charges being dropped. The most chilling incident came on August 25, 2021, just 2 months before their wedding, at 4:30 a.m. Neighbor Malcolm heard disturbing noises from Dawn's house. When he went to check, he found Dawn clearly distressed. Again, Thomas was arrested. And again, Dawn withdrew her statement. Each cycle of abuse ended the same way: arrest, denial, release. The system could not protect her, and Thomas grew bolder, convinced he could act with impunity. By July 2020, desperate for answers, Dawn reached out to someone who knew Thomas's violence all too well: his ex-partner, Kimberly. Dawn had discovered Kimberly had a restraining order against him and asked why. Kimberly showed Dawn photographs of her injuries, warned her of his temper, and told her he will end up killing Dawn one day. Dawn admitted that Thomas scared her, and the two women stayed in touch over social media. Sometimes, when things were especially bad, Dawn would reach out to Kimberly, seeking advice, comfort, or simply confirmation that she wasn't imagining the danger she was in. After the August 2020 attack, Dawn confided in Kimberly that Thomas had nearly killed her. But in the same breath, she admitted she loved him. Kimberly's last message to Dawn asked if she was going to be okay. Dawn never replied. By then, Thomas had already blocked Kimberly from Dawn's social media accounts, cutting her off from one of the few people who truly understood the danger she was in. A week before the big day, Dawn confided to her daughter, Cody, that she had a terrible feeling something bad was going to happen. October 27, 2021, should have been a day of joy. Dawn and Thomas were married at a registry office in Halifax, surrounded by friends and family who believed they were witnessing a new beginning. Afterward, Dawn and Thomas celebrated with a reception at the Prince Albert pub in Bry House. Glasses clinked, music played, and well-wishers cheered. But those closest to Dawn noticed that something was off. She was shaking, her hands trembling, her smile strained. Instead of glowing with happiness, she seemed anxious, distracted, almost resigned. Some guests put it down to nerves, reminding themselves that weddings can be overwhelming. Others, however, felt her unease went far deeper than cold feet. What they couldn't have known was that the wedding reception they were attending was, in truth, Dawn's farewell gathering. By 10:30 p.m., the night was winding down. Dawn and Thomas ordered a taxi to take them home to their bungalow on Shirley Grove in Lightcliff. The driver later told police that the journey was eerily quiet. No laughter, no conversation, none of the excitement one would expect from newlyweds. Instead, there was a heavy tension in the car. At 10:36 p.m., CCTV captured Dawn stepping out of the taxi and walking towards her front door. It would be the last time anyone ever saw her alive. Around 11 o'clock p.m., the neighbor heard noises coming from next door. They weren't the joyful sounds of a wedding night, but dull, Heavy thuds, bumps and crashes that went on for nearly an hour. Crucially, there were no voices, no arguments, no screams. Nothing to suggest a struggle between two people. On 31 October, Thomas called police to report Dawn Walker missing. He said they had been on a 2-day caravan honeymoon at a car park in Skegness, where they had been watching DVDs. He told police he had been driving around Brighouse, West Yorkshire, that morning looking for her. At 4:38 p.m., on the 31st of October, CCTV captured him dragging a large suitcase through his back garden. Just minutes before police officers were due to arrive, a neighbor had already noticed his strange behavior and called police, reporting seeing Thomas with the suitcase. The investigators were shown CCTV footage of Thomas pulling a large suitcase out of the back of the couple's home and hiding it in nearby bushes minutes before a police officer arrived at his home to follow up on his missing person report. What made the murder even more chilling was that it occurred just hours after Dawn and Thomas had exchanged their wedding vows. The very man who had promised to love and cherish her instead killed her in their bedroom. After murdering his wife, he faced a practical problem: what to do with her body. First, he hid Dawn's body inside a kitchen cupboard. At 1:00 a.m., on the 28th of October, just hours after killing his wife, he used her mobile phone to send text messages to Cody. The messages were clearly not written by Dawn. They lacked her usual tone and style. In the early morning, he began washing the clothes he had worn on the night of the killing. CCTV cameras later captured him at 5:10 p.m., hanging those freshly laundered clothes in the back garden, garments that had been worn only hours before during the attack. Then, Thomas traveled alone to Skegness with their caravan. On the 31st of October, Halloween, Thomas returned and spent the morning decorating the house for the holiday, even putting up fake police tape, all while Dawn's corpse remained concealed inside. Then he called the police, told officers that Dawn suffered from mental health problems, and portrayed himself as a worried husband with no idea where she might be. He takes her daughter, Kira, and her young son to find her. They visited local shops, hospitals, and scoured the neighborhood. Then, realizing he could not delay much longer without arousing suspicion, he decided to dispose of Dawn's body. Later that day, members of the public discovered Dawn's body dumped in undergrowth near Aysgarth Avenue, not far from Shirley Grove. She had been stuffed into the suitcase. The prosecutor said Dawn's post-mortem examination showed she had suffered serious injuries to her neck, which suggested blunt force trauma to her neck. Thomas later confessed to killing Dawn, pleading guilty to manslaughter, but denying murder. He said that, after returning home, Dawn started screaming, and he punched her in the face and put his arms around her neck. The evidence against him, however, was overwhelming. CCTV showed him dragging the suitcase containing Dawn's body at the exact time police were preparing to search his house. There was no footage of Dawn leaving her home after 10:36 p.m. On her wedding night, the false text messages sent from her phone proved his deception beyond doubt. Most damning of all was the testimony of those who knew his history of violence. Kimberly, his former partner, bravely testified about the years of abuse she had endured at his hands. The trial at Bradford Crown Court began in July 2022. Thomas Nutt admitted to manslaughter but denied murder. His defense argued that he acted in a fit of rage after Dawn Walker told him she wanted a divorce just hours after their wedding, claiming the killing was spontaneous rather than premeditated. However, prosecutor Alistair MacDonald portrayed Thomas as a manipulative man with a long history of violence against female partners, insisting that the murder was the inevitable result of years of escalating domestic abuse. Thomas chose not to testify in his own defense, and prosecutors emphasized that he could offer no credible explanation for the overwhelming evidence against him. The 11-day trial featured testimony from numerous witnesses. On the 10th of August, 2022, after only a few hours of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous guilty verdict for murder. Cheers erupted from the public gallery as justice was finally served for Dawn Walker. 9 days later, Thomas Nutt was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 21 years. While some believed the punishment was not severe enough, authorities clarified that it was the maximum available sentence given the circumstances and his prior guilty plea to manslaughter, which legally had to be taken into account. Dawn Walker's murder tragically highlighted systemic failures in protecting victims of domestic violence. Despite repeated incidents of abuse and glaring warning signs, Dawn was not adequately safeguarded. He was repeatedly accused by his partner, but the system failed to recognize his dangerous behavior and link it to his history of violence. After the trial, prosecutors stressed that this was a predictable and preventable tragedy. The red flags were visible, yet decisive. Intervention never came. In 2022, reports emerged that Thomas Nutt had been attacked while serving his sentence at Leeds prison. Later that October, he filed an appeal against his conviction. Thomas Nutt stole everything from Dawn Walker: her life, her dreams, and her future with her daughters and grandchildren. Words cannot fully capture the devastation his actions left behind. Friends and family spoke of losing not only a beloved mother and grandmother, but also a best friend and a guiding presence. Though her family remains close, Dawn's absence has left a void that can never be filled. Let us remember Dawn Walker not for the way she died, but for the way she lived, with kindness, warmth, and generosity toward everyone around her. Her light was extinguished far too soon, but her memory endures in the hearts of all who knew and loved her. On the night of April 5, 2023, amid torrential hailstorms in a deserted construction site, firefighters thought they were dealing with a small blaze. But when the flames were extinguished, they found a nearly unrecognizable body amid the charred ashes. And nearby, a small, drenched, forlorn white dog. Determined not to leave the scene, the dog's presence led police to suspect that the victim might be its owner. 26 years old, Mandy Rose Reynolds, who had left Idaho to start a new life in Texas. From there, the investigation fell into a vortex of suspicion, violence, and betrayal. Eventually, the police follow a lead to a familiar name. The cousin who Mandy once helped, now accused of burning her body to cover her tracks. This is more than just a murder. It's a story of trust betrayed, of darkness hidden behind intimacy, and of a loyal dog who helps guide the truth into the light. Mandy Rose Reynolds was born in 1996 in Idaho. Her mother, Carlene Hardy. I had an older son before she was born. Carlene later began a relationship with a man who embraced both children as his own, creating a loving and stable home. In that supportive environment, Mandy grew up feeling safe and cared for. From an early age, Mandy was known for her generosity and lively personality. Friends and family described her as creative, kind-hearted, and always ready to help. By early 2023, she had formed a new, meaningful bond. She adopted a white dog named Titan. To Mandy, Titan was more than a pet. He was a loyal companion who brought joy, security, and comfort. He joined her on quiet evenings and new adventures, and stayed close during hard times. That same year, Mandy left Idaho and moved to Texas, excited to start fresh. She looked forward to growth and dreamed of starting college, approaching the future with determination. Through it all, Titan remained by her side. In February or March of 2023, Mandy reconnected with her cousin Derek Dino, who was a couple of years older and had been out of touch for some time. After a casual conversation, Derek asked if he could stay at her apartment. True to her generous nature, Mandy agreed, never imagining the dark consequences that would follow. On the night of Wednesday, April 5, 2023, Emergency services received a call about a fire. It was initially reported as a small blaze, possibly burning shrubs near a construction site. Firefighters and police responded, but as they worked to extinguish the flames, they made a shocking discovery: a badly burned, nearly unrecognizable body. What began as a routine call became a crime scene. Reinforcements arrived. Fire investigators, paramedics, and more officers. Early observations suggested the remains were female, based on a visible bra strap among the ashes. The weather made everything harder. Heavy rain and hail pounded the area. Amid the chaos, a frantic white dog circled the site, barking and howling. It refused to leave, despite all attempts to reassure it. Some people question, is it warning people away? Or is it trying to lead them to the truth? After the fire was finally put out, the body was recovered and sent for examination. The victim's identity remained unknown that night, but the white dog remained nearby. The next day, a passerby saw him again and called animal control. When they scanned the microchip, they learned its name was Titan, and its owner was Mandy Reynolds. With that lead, investigators suspected the body might be Mandy Zulf, NREDHS. They called the phone number linked to Titan's registration. The first call went unanswered, but soon a woman called back, identifying herself as Mandy. The call was transferred to the lead detective. After introductions, the detective asked her to describe her dog and give her address. She said Titan was a white poodle, retriever mix, and that she lived in San Marcos. She claimed the dog had run off while she was traveling. Her story quickly grew inconsistent. She spoke in fragments about being on the road, visiting friends, and heading to Wichita, details that didn't align. Noticing irregularities, the detective continued to query. He asked if she was staying in Robinson. She denied it, insisting she was headed to Wichita, but eventually admitted she had stopped at a rest area. Asked to repeat her name, she identified herself as Mandy, the same name as the dog's registered owner. When asked about the microchip registration, she said she thought it might be under her fiancé's name, which is why they named the dog Titan. She said they completed the registration together. By now, the inconsistencies had the detective on alert. He kept questioning her to pin down her movements. She grew impatient and asked whether the dog had been taken to a shelter. The officer confirmed the dog was in custody, but kept probing to test her account. When asked again about directions, she said she was on her way to Wichita to get the dog back. She said the purpose of the trip was to visit her fiancé's sick grandmother. According to her, Titan bolted from the car during a roadside stop. They searched for hours, she claimed, but couldn't find him. The detective asked for details about where the incident took place. She described it only as a rest area, like a truck stop. When asked for more details, she couldn't provide any. She said it happened around 1:00 a.m. the previous night, but wasn't certain. The questioning continued. The detective asked what vehicle she was driving in case coordination was needed to return the dog. After hesitating, she said it was a silver, relatively new Toyota Camry. Her impatience flared again. She said she was at work and just wanted her dog back. She apologized for the trouble and said she'd come pick him up, though it would be a drive of more than 120 miles. Still unsatisfied, the detective summarized her story and asked again for clarity. She grew irritated and questioned why she was being interrogated over something so simple. The detective explained that he needed to confirm why a dog claiming to be hers had appeared under unusual circumstances. She again gave her name as Mandy and why. Before hanging up, said she would go to the shelter to collect the dog. Less than an hour later, the detective called back, this time with a gentler tone. He said their first conversation might have started off poorly, then explained the real reason for his persistence. The dog wasn't just found wandering. He was discovered near a fire scene, where investigators also found a body. The detective, choosing his words carefully, said he couldn't share all the details because the matter was sensitive. He hinted at the seriousness of the situation. Then the woman exclaimed in surprise and said she had been very worried about Titan, noting how much they had paid for him. She asked how long he had been outside. The detective said his questions were meant to establish a timeline. She apologized, sounding shaken, and said she couldn't imagine what the dog had experienced. The detective pressed, "I had Titan run off the night before." She said yes. He pointed out that if that were true, the dog should have been found by morning. This seemed to confuse her. She ultimately said she couldn't give an exact answer. The detective also noticed the phone number she was using wasn't registered to her. She said it belonged to her fiancé's grandfather. When asked for the grandfather's name for verification, she became evasive and then snapped. She said the conversation made no sense. Her dog had simply escaped. So why was she being interrogated? The officer tried to explain he was just seeking clarity, but her tone grew defensive. She accused him of being overly aggressive and suggested she was being treated like a criminal. The detective explained the timeline mattered because it could show whether the dog had interacted with the body at the scene. She dismissed this and demanded that he stop calling. Before ending the call, the officer stated clearly that Titan was in police custody and could not be released. The woman responded that her lawyer would handle the situation. After hanging up, the detective felt even more suspicious. Her story didn't add up, and her defensive tone seemed out of place. Following that instinct, police asked local authorities to conduct a welfare check at Mandy's home. What they found deepened the mystery. The house was empty, her belongings were gone, and her car was missing. New questions emerged. Who had actually been on the phone? Mandy or an impersonator? And was the burned body from the fire scene connected to her disappearance? Investigators began tracing Mandy's vehicle through license plate databases. They found Mandy's car in Wichita, more than 600 meters from the scene, and expanded the search around the missing car. Meanwhile, forensic analysis provided a breakthrough. Dental records confirmed the remains from the fire were those of 26 years old, Mandy Rose Reynolds. The autopsy determined Mandy had been shot in the head before her body was set on fire to destroy evidence. Her remains had been placed in a large plastic storage container, where investigators found a spent shell casing. On April 7, police located Mandy's personal items inside an abandoned truck a few miles from her home. The evidence suggested a calculated crime, not an accident. On April 8, Wichita police spotted Mandy's missing car. When officers tried to pull it over, the driver sped off, weaving through traffic at more than 130 miles per hour. A chaotic 30-minute pursuit followed. The suspect rammed multiple patrol cars while trying to escape. Miraculously, no one was hurt. Eventually, the car stopped, and the driver fled on foot toward a crowded supermarket. Surveillance footage later showed him rushing inside. Officers with long rifles set up a perimeter and warned bystanders to stay in their vehicles. Inside, shoppers fled as police moved through the aisles. Moments later, officers found the suspect hiding under a shelf stacked with canned goods. They ordered him out, then pulled him from hiding and handcuffed him. The suspect was identified as Derek Daigneault. He was arrested, held on a $1 million bond, and jailed in Kansas pending extradition to Texas for the murder of his cousin, Mandy. He also faced 15 additional charges related to the dangerous chase inside the abandoned vehicle. Investigators found a firearm. Ballistics matched it to the shell casing recovered from the plastic container where Mandy's body had been burned. For Mandy's mother, Carlene, the discovery was devastating. She had lost her daughter, and the prime suspect was her grandson. In a fundraiser for funeral expenses, Carlene wrote that Derek had deceived Mandy to gain her trust and move in. Records showed that when Derek moved into Mandy's home, he was on parole for a felony. His criminal history stretched back years, including violent incidents as a teenager, such as an armed attack. The case against Derek becomes more serious when police find surveillance footage from the day Mandy's body was discovered. He was seen buying a large plastic storage container identical to the one used in the crime, along with a shovel and a gas can. The video also captures the scene of the dog Titan sitting in the car, sticking its head out of the window. Investigators also suspected Derek was the person who called the police pretending to be Mandy, though this was never officially confirmed. What was indisputable was the forensic evidence. The bullet recovered from Mandy's body, and the casing near the container both matched the gun found in Derek's possession, a weapon registered to his grandmother. In January 2024, Derek pleaded guilty to multiple charges stemming from the Wichita pursuit: fleeing or attempting to elude an officer, aggravated assault, illegal possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, and theft. 2 months later, a Kansas judge sentenced him to just over 9 years in prison. He was then transferred to Texas to stand trial for Mandy's murder. The trial began in early November 2024 and revealed disturbing details about Derek's past. Prosecutors portrayed him as extremely violent and a continuing threat to the public. On November 7, after less than an hour of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Derek Daigneault was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. During victim impact statements, Mandy's mother, stepfather, and older brother spoke about their grief and the void her death left behind. As they spoke, Derek interrupted repeatedly, hurling insults and even accusing his cousin of criminal behavior. Court officers quickly removed him, but tensions between the families escalated into a heated confrontation inside the courthouse. Outside, as Derek was taken back to jail, he spoke to reporters, again accusing his cousin of crimes. When asked about his own actions, he responded coldly and without remorse that he was a criminal. His attorney later thanked the jury, but expressed deep disappointment with the verdict and sentence. Announcing plans to appeal, the district attorney's office called the outcome a victory for justice, crediting 2 key factors: the unwavering loyalty of a heroic dog and seamless cooperation among law enforcement agencies across state lines. They emphasized that these efforts brought justice for Mandy and protected the community from a dangerous offender. As for Titan, the dog was adopted by Mandy's best friend, who told reporters that the little dog is thriving, yet one haunting question remains: why? What drove Derek to betray and destroy Mandy, who had treated him well and given him a home? His true motives may never be fully known. Some secrets remain buried, leaving a story marked not only by tragedy, but also by unanswered questions. On a crisp October evening in 2012, a promising college student vanished without a trace. Elizabeth was only 19, full of dreams, laughter, and kindness. When she walked into an apartment in Dover, New Hampshire, never came out alive. What happened inside would horrify investigators, the community asking a haunting question: how could such a dark force lurk behind such ordinary faces? Elizabeth Marriott, affectionately known as Lizzie, was born in 1993 in Massachusetts. She grew up in a loving and stable family. On weekends, Lizzie loved walking along the ocean shore, breathing in the cool air and feeling the wind from the water. During these quiet walks, she often thought about her future and made plans for the life she was so eager to live. Lizzie had a younger brother, and from an early age, she loved animals, especially aquatic creatures. In one photo, Lizzie can be seen holding a frog she had just rescued from the road. She looked so happy to carry it safely to the edge of a stream, away from danger. After graduating high school in 2011, Lizzie first enrolled in college in her hometown. Alongside her studies, she volunteered, devoting much of her free time to helping animals. In the fall of 2012, 19-year-old Lizzie transferred to the University of New Hampshire, entering as a sophomore. Her dream was finally coming true. She was studying marine biology and hoped to turn her passion into a career after graduation. While attending school, Lizzie moved into her aunt and uncle's house in Chester, New Hampshire, which allowed her to save money on housing. She also worked part-time at a Target store. Both classmates, co-workers described Lizzie as kind, friendly, and always ready to help. But one day, that very openness would lead her into deadly danger. Tuesday, October 9, 2012, began like any ordinary day for Lizzie. She spent about 8 hours at the university before returning briefly to her aunt and uncle's home. She then left a note saying she was going to visit a friend and promised to be back before midnight. But by 1 or 2 in the morning on Wednesday, she still hadn't returned. Her aunt and uncle assumed she had stayed the night with her friend and gone directly to campus in the morning. Yet another day passed. By Thursday, there was still no sign of Lizzie. On the morning of October 11, Lizzie's aunt phoned her parents, hoping they knew where she was. But her father said he hadn't been able to reach her for several days. Alarmed, her parents, who lived about 2 hours away, immediately got into their car to search for their daughter. On the way, they contacted the police and officially reported her missing. Neither her parents nor her aunt and uncle knew exactly which friend she had gone to see on Tuesday evening. Police began an intensive search. Lizzie's phone was switched off. She had no social media activity, and her bank accounts were untouched. At first, detectives suspected she might have been in an accident, but soon her car was found parked on the University of New Hampshire campus, empty, and offering no clues about her disappearance. Her parents made a public appeal, offering a $10,000 reward for information about their daughter. Investigators interviewed all her friends. They discovered that on October 9, Lizzie had planned to visit Catherine McDonough, also known as Kat, a co-worker she had recently befriended at Target. Colleagues recalled that Lizzie and Kat often spent time together after work. When Lizzie went missing, a friend named Nate McNeil suspected she had gone to Kat's home. He texted Kat, asking if Lizzie had been at her place. Kat replied that she hadn't seen her and that she had never come over. At that time, 18-year-old Kat was living with her boyfriend, Seth Matzalia. The two had met the previous year through the local theater, where they both acted. Seth, then 30, was a graduate of the University of New Hampshire with a degree in theater arts. He also worked as an ambulance attendant, held a black belt in karate, and was employed as a consultant at an electronics store, while teaching martial arts on the side. When Seth and Kat first met, she was just 17. Shortly after she turned 18, he invited her to move in with him. They settled into an apartment in Dover, New Hampshire. Friends and co-workers noticed a dramatic change in Kat after she began her relationship with Seth. Once friendly and outgoing, she became withdrawn, stopped talking to colleagues, distanced herself from friends, and even cut off nearly all contact with her own parents. Kat's parents strongly disapproved of their daughter's relationship with Seth, choosing love over family. Kat cut off nearly all contact with them. While investigating Lizzie's disappearance, police uncovered disturbing details about Seth and Kat's lifestyle. They were deeply involved in BDSM, with Seth taking the role of dominant partner. Kat even posted ads online under the pseudonyms Vampire Actress and Miss Scarlet. She attached dark, moody photos of herself and wrote posts looking for people to collaborate with their games. Detectives became convinced that Seth and Kat were connected to Lizzie's disappearance. Lizzie vanished on October 9, 2012, and by the 12th, both Seth and Kat were brought in for questioning. They were placed in separate rooms. Kat insisted she had never seen Lizzie that evening, and denied Lizzie ever came to their apartment. After 2 hours of interrogation, she stopped answering questions and was released, though she remained at the station, waiting for Seth. Seth's story was very different. He admitted that Lizzie had, in fact, visited their apartment. According to him, he engaged in intimate with both women, using ropes to tie them up. He claimed something went wrong, and Lizzie accidentally died. Seth's interrogation lasted 11 hours. He further confessed that after Lizzie's death, he and Kat transported her body to Portsmouth, where the Piscataqua River meets the Atlantic Ocean, and disposed of it there. Seth was immediately arrested and charged with murder. The details of his statement were initially withheld from the public. Following this confession, police accompanied Seth to the location he described. He led them to Pierce Island on the Piscataqua River, an area notorious for its dangerous tides and currents. Lizzie's parents were informed of the devastating news. On Saturday, October 13, 2012, a candlelight vigil was held in memory of Lizzie Marriott. Meanwhile, detectives searched Seth and Kat's Dover apartment. The home was messy, but nothing immediately incriminating was found inside. Outside, however, in nearby garbage containers, investigators discovered a bag containing men's underwear, a pair of black leather gloves, and a sweatshirt. Forensic testing revealed DNA evidence on the underwear linking Lizzie to Seth, confirming close physical contact. Despite extensive searches along the river, Lizzie's body was never recovered. Detectives concluded that the strong currents likely carried her remains into the Atlantic Ocean. During the investigation, one of Seth's ex-girlfriends, Catherine Fish, contacted authorities. Though they had not spoken in nearly a decade, she felt compelled to share details of their past relationship. Catherine explained that in the beginning, Seth was charming, showering her with flowers, compliments, and affection. But when intimacy grew more serious, she discovered he was consumed by BDSM. Over time, he became increasingly cruel and began speaking openly about violent fantasies, even killing someone. On one occasion, Seth wrapped his hands tightly around her throat until she begged him to release her, but he only squeezed harder. Terrified, Catherine wanted to leave him. Yet by then, they had moved to another city where she had no family or friends. With no money and nowhere to go, she felt trapped. Seth began complaining that he wanted a third partner in their relationship and sometimes brought other girls into their home. Though none stayed long, Catherine's life became unbearable. But she feared that if she fled, Seth would track her down and harm her. After months of living in fear, Catherine finally decided to escape. She left without warning, driving nearly 1,000 kilometers back to her parents' home. That decision ended the relationship, and she never saw Seth again. 2 days after Seth's arrest, his girlfriend Kat met with her lawyer and recorded a video statement. In it, Kat admitted that Lizzie Marriott had been at their apartment on October 9, 2012. According to Kat, the three of them first watched a movie and then began playing strip poker. During the game, they became aroused and decided to intimate. Kat claimed that Lizzie agreed to this and even consented to being tied up with ropes. Kat drew a diagram showing how Seth restrained Lizzie. She said that at first, Lizzie appeared fine, but then, while tied on the floor, she suddenly had a seizure, began choking, lost consciousness, and died. Lizzie's family immediately rejected this account. They refused to believe she would voluntarily engage in intimate with strangers. To them, Kat's version sounded fabricated and implausible. 2 months later, Kat was arrested and charged with 3 counts of obstruction of justice. Investigators uncovered disturbing details. While in custody, Kat and Seth exchanged letters and even plotted an escape so they could flee abroad, marry, and avoid testifying against one another. Their plan failed. In one letter, Seth wrote that they needed to be reborn and meet again in another life. Obsessed with dark magic, Seth believed that death was not the end, but as time passed, Kat began to distance herself from Seth's influence. Prosecutors offered her a deal. Instead of facing up to 20 years in prison, she could plead guilty, testify truthfully against Seth, and serve only 3 years. Kat eventually accepted. In May 2014, nearly 2 years after Lizzie's death, Seth Mazzaglia went on trial. Prosecutors argued that his actions were deliberate and premeditated. In court, they read text messages Seth had sent to Kat on August 25, 2012, 6 weeks before Lizzie's disappearance. In those messages, Seth demanded that Kat find a third partner to live with them as a slave. He also ordered her to find him another girl to entertain him while she was away. That same August, Kat left town for 10 days to attend a theater camp, but failed to recruit anyone, as her online ads received little response. Enraged, Seth began threatening her with violent consequences if she did not produce someone. He told Kat that she must bring home a friend he could intimate with, even in front of her, or face his wrath. During the trial, Kat testified under oath, offering a chilling new account of what happened on the night Lizzie died. She said she had been living in constant fear of Seth and obeyed him without question. She admitted that she invited Lizzie over, knowing Seth wanted to meet her. Lizzie trusted Kat. They had hung out once before as friends, so she accepted the invitation. Kat said Seth was already aware of Lizzie's visit, had seen her photos, and told Kat he found her very attractive. On the evening of October 9, Lizzie arrived at the Dover apartment around 9:00 p.m. The three picked a movie to play in the background and began playing strip cards. The room was dimly lit, and laughter filled the air as they played. Lizzie lost most often and was eventually left in her underwear. When she lost another round, Seth suggested she kiss Lizzie, but she refused. He then suggested intimate in another room, which she again refused. Seth's frustration quickly turned to anger. As Kat and Lizzie sat together on the floor, Seth left the room. He returned wearing black leather gloves and carrying a rope. Without warning, he sat down behind Lizzie, looped the rope around her neck, and strangled her. Lizzie struggled, but within moments she was dead. Then, in a horrifying act, Seth carried out what prosecutors said he had fantasized about for years. He assaulted Lizzie's lifeless body. Kat, frozen with fear, sat nearby and did nothing to intervene or help her friend. At 10:49 p.m., Seth called his friend Roberta Gherkin, telling her that he needed help and asking her to come over. Roberta arrived with her boyfriend, Paul Hickok, sometime after 11:00 p.m. When they entered the apartment, they found Seth sitting on the bed, with Lizzie Marriott's body lying at his feet on the floor. She was dressed only in underwear, and a plastic bag had been placed over her head. Kat was in the kitchen, sitting on the floor in the fetal position. Rocking back and forth, Roberta and Paul asked what had happened. Seth gave no coherent explanation, only repeating that things had gone too far. He sat calmly on the bed, muttering the same words again and again. Roberta and Paul chose not to intervene. Instead of calling the police, they simply advised Seth to call an ambulance, and then left, wanting to avoid involvement. According to Kat, after his friends departed, Seth stood with his back to her, extended his hand, and told her, "Together, they will cope with this." Terrified of defying him, Kat obeyed. Around 1:00 a.m., she wrapped Lizzie's body in a tarpaulin and placed it into a suitcase. They dragged the suitcase to Lizzie's car, parked nearby. They then drove toward Pierce Island on the Piscataqua River, roughly 20 kilometers away, carefully avoiding toll roads. At the edge of the island, they hauled the suitcase to an observation deck overlooking the water. Together, they pulled Lizzie from the suitcase, and Seth shoved her body off the cliff. But the tide was low. Instead of disappearing into the river, Lizzie landed on the rocks, her body clearly visible from the shore. Seth ordered Kat to climb down, claiming he was too tired. Kat obeyed. She covered Lizzie's body with seaweed and dragged it into the water before returning. Afterwards, they abandoned Lizzie's car in the University New Hampshire campus parking lot and walked nearly 10 kilometers home. The following day, they began destroying evidence. Kat never went to police because she feared Seth. She initially lied, insisting Lizzie had never come over, terrified that if she told the truth, she would suffer the same fate. During the trial, Kat cried constantly, though witnesses noted she never produced tears. When the prosecutor asked why she cried without tears, Kat bizarrely replied that she didn't know, adding that Her cat sometimes does the same. Seth's defense attorney argued that Kat was an actress with theater training and accused her of fabricating her second story, insisting that her first account, claiming Lizzie's death was accidental during intimacy, was the truth. Kat's defense attorney admits that Kat helped dispose of Lizzie's body, but argues that Seth bears full responsibility for her death. They countered that by 2012, Kat was completely isolated. She had cut ties with friends, stopped speaking to her parents, and was under Seth's constant control. He demanded intimate, sometimes up to 10 times a day, leaving her broken and submissive. One of the most damning pieces of evidence was a pair of black leather gloves found in a trash can behind Seth's apartment. DNA testing confirmed Lizzie's genetic profile on them. Prosecutors argued that Seth deliberately put on the gloves before strangling Lizzie, proving premeditation. On June 27, 2014, Seth Mazzaglia faced a jury. He was convicted of first-degree murder by strangulation, abuse and first-degree murder, and 2 counts of conspiracy. On August 14, 2014, Seth was sentenced to life in prison without parole. 20-year-old Catherine McDonough, who accepted a plea bargain for obstruction of justice and conspiracy, received 3 years in prison. While incarcerated, Kat reportedly told her cellmate she wanted to return to her father's house on the ocean once released. She was freed in July 2016. However, her notoriety made it nearly impossible to find work. Employers and neighbors shunned her. Kat is not required to report to authorities. Today she lives quietly, avoiding media attention and social networks. Lizzie Marriott's body was never recovered. Since 2012, her devastated parents have avoided the beach, unable to face the sea, knowing their daughter's remains lie somewhere beneath its waves. In her memory, they built a small monument, a sunlit bench beside a forest lake in their home state of Massachusetts. There, they sit and remember their daughter, believing that her soul is finally free. For many years, Jade Jenks always believed that she owed Tom Merriman for the rest of her life. He stepped into her shattered life as a source of support, called her his daughter, and made her believe she still had a family. But one afternoon in late 2020, as Jade was cleaning up, Tom's computer screen suddenly lit up. In that moment, her world collapsed. On the screen were hundreds of photos of herself, secretly taken and stored for years, recording her most private moments in the home she once considered safe. From that moment on, the image of her father disappeared, revealing a sick person, a man who had stalked and violated her for a long time. Disgust, fear, and humiliation overwhelmed Jade, pushing her into a dead end. A few days later, Tom Merriman disappeared, and it was Jade Jenks who called the police. The question that shocked America was, what made a woman who once considered him a father become a murderer? Jade Jenks, a Californian, who was raised by her biological father and was her sole guardian from a young age. He provided her with stability, care, and support. Her relationship with her mother was irregular and complicated. Her mother struggled with addiction and mental health issues, and was unable to care for her. Even so, she still tried to visit her mother. When Jade was 14, her mother met and later married Tom Merriman, who became her stepfather. Tom was older, employed, and appeared responsible. When Cash, the son of Jade's mother and Tom, was born, Jade was very fond of him and wanted to be deeply involved in his life. Initially, Tom was simply her mother's partner. Their interactions were polite but distant. Over time, as they talked and developed mutual respect, they grew closer. Tom called Jade his daughter. After Jade's mother relapsed and missed Cash's first school assembly, Jade decided to move in with Tom and Cash to help care for the family. From then on, Jade became the primary caretaker in Tom's home, cleaning, managing daily routines, and looking after Cash, filling the role her mother was no longer able to fulfill. Sharing these responsibilities during difficult times brought Jade and Tom even closer. Together, they handled the challenges caused by her mother's worsening instability. For Jade, Tom became a steady, almost father-like figure during a period when her mother's life was falling apart. After her mother was taken into custody, Jade stayed with Tom and Cash. They moved to a new house to start over. Jade, now in her early 22nd, takes on full responsibility for Cash's care and continues to run the household. She had long lived between two worlds, one defined by her father's steady love, and another where she had to act as an adult to keep a fragile home functioning. Tom became her anchor in that uncertainty, and their relationship grew on a foundation of deep trust. That bond would later make what happened even more painful. Tom Merriman, 64, lives in Solana Beach, San Diego County, and is known for his neat lifestyle. He had 3 biological sons, but often said he had 4, always including Jade as his daughter, despite no blood relation. For years, Tom worked in palm tree cultivation. In 2011, he changed careers and co-founded a butterfly farm that sold plants to attract butterflies to home gardens. Business is booming, especially during times when people are spending more time gardening. Professionally, Tom appeared accomplished, passionate about nature, meticulous in his work, respected by customers, and admired by colleagues. His private life, however, was more troubled. He suffered from serious health issues. Years of heavy drinking had damaged his liver and heart. Though he functioned well outwardly, he required ongoing medical care and strong medications. By late 2020, after eye surgery that temporarily affected his vision, Tom was injured and needed a prolonged rehabilitation stay. During this period, Jade took full responsibility for the household. She visited regularly to maintain the home and prepare for his return, knowing he would need significant support once he came back. After moving into her mother's home, Jade quickly became deeply involved in the family's daily life. Living with Tom settled into a clear routine. He handled finances and was occasionally present, while Jade managed everything inside the house: chores, emotional support, and logistics. Beneath that surface stability, tension grew. Jade realized she was carrying most of the burden. Tom becomes increasingly distant, and although he is Cash's father, Jade is the one who takes care of the boy's daily needs. She felt overwhelmed and resentful. She became invisible, always expected to help, and never asked how she was or what she needed. What made it worse were Tom's frequent digs at her biological father. Jade had a strong bond with her dad, who had given her stability, and steady support. Tom openly belittled him, constantly comparing himself in an attempt to look better. To Jade, it felt like he was trying to replace her father, not just at home but in her mind. His comments felt deeply disrespectful to her father and to her. Unease took root. Jade began to question her boundaries. She didn't want to leave too soon. Cash still needed her, especially without his mother by his side. But living where her feelings were ignored became increasingly intolerable. Her work was taken for granted. No thanks. No recognition. Eventually, she decided to leave. It wasn't impulsive. It was a careful choice born of frustration and a need to reclaim her life. She moved out, focused on her career, and started living independently. She kept in touch with Tom and Cash, politely but distantly. This quiet separation marked a turning point. For the first time in years, Jade could prioritize herself. She poured her energy into professional growth and building a life on her terms. She didn't cut ties, but interactions with Tom became occasional and formal. Her relationship with Cash remains strong, although she maintains her distance from Tom. Years passed, and it seemed their shared chapter had ended. Then, by chance, Jade bought a house on the same street as Tom, just a few doors away. The coincidence prompted a slow reconnection, brief chats on the sidewalk, then occasional dinners. Over time, their relationship seemed steady again. To others, they appeared close, with no visible tension. Tom seemed genuinely grateful for her attention, especially as his health declined. Jade didn't voice past grievances. On the surface, they looked like they had rebuilt trust, but Jade's motives were unclear. She resumed contact without the same warmth. Her presence felt more like duty than desire. She was still polite and attentive, but emotionally cold. In Tom's house, but not really belonging there. Their balance was fragile, an illusion of harmony. Under these conditions, everything changed. In late 2020, while Tom was recovering in a medical facility, Jade was cleaning his house. She wiped a table and accidentally touched the sleeping computer. The screen woke up, and what she saw shocked her. A private, intimate photo of herself, fully exposed. One she had once sent to a former partner in confidence. She tried to find a logical explanation, a glitch, a mistake, but quickly realized this was not it. The image filled the entire screen, deliberately set as the wallpaper. Jade froze, unsure what to do. In the home of someone she had trusted, she had just discovered a blatant violation of her privacy. That moment became a turning point, permanently changing how she saw Tom. What Jade saw was not only unsettling, but also potentially criminal. She had no idea where the images had come from. And, more terrifyingly, she wasn't sure if any of them had been taken when she was still underage. Though worse revelations lay ahead, she knew in that moment her life had irreversibly changed. She didn't leave the house. Stunned but determined to understand, she turned on the computer and started searching its files. She looked calm, but dread mounted inside her. In the file manager, she found several hidden time-and password-protected folders. To her surprise, one password unlocked them. It was the name of one of her pets. Inside were hundreds of photos of her, organized by year. These weren't casual shots. They were invasive, taken without her knowledge. In the bathroom, the bedroom, while she changed, or simply relaxed at home. It didn't just disturb her, it destroyed her sense of safety. Each image deepened her horror. Some had clearly been captured by hidden cameras, surveillance devices likely installed in the house. To a stranger, they might look like random internet photos. But Jade knew instantly they were of her. The pajamas, the decor, the facial expressions, the body language of private habits that no one should see. All were visible. Her mind couldn't absorb the sheer volume. Shock turned to dread, then to physical revulsion. Her breathing grew ragged. Nausea surged. The world seemed to collapse around her. With every folder and every new image, the truth became undeniable. Her life had been watched, recorded, and built on deception. She didn't call emergency services. She wasn't acting on logic. She acted on emotion. She began deleting. She opened every folder and subfolder, searching for duplicates. But each deletion brought a new understanding. This couldn't be erased from her memory. Desperate to destroy it all, she kept searching, until she found an external hard drive. She knew immediately this was likely the main archive. After plugging it in, she saw the same structure, but with even more files. She deleted everything, then physically removed the drive. She smashed it with a heavy object until the casing broke, wrapped it in a towel, and threw it into an outdoor trash bin. Only after making sure it was unusable did she return inside and sink to the floor, unsure what to do next. What she'd thought was family now felt like something else entirely. This wasn't just betrayal. It was the collapse of everything she believed in, the values she thought her life rested on. After destroying the drive, Jade spiraled. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, the images returned. She saw her own body, familiar, yet violated. Again and again, the same thoughts looped. He saw this. He saved this. He looked at it for years. Shame crept in. She felt used, as if she no longer owned her body. Even showering felt wrong. The water didn't cleanse. It made her feel exposed. She scrubbed her skin until it reddened, but the feeling stayed. The mirror felt like an audience. She felt watched, reduced to an object. That sensation lodged in her sense of self and wouldn't let go. She lost her appetite. Even thinking about food made her stomach clench. Jade's mind was gripped by relentless, growing anxiety. Every sound outside the door, every footstep in the hallway felt threatening. She listened for noises in the silence, checked the locks, kept the lights on. The fear didn't lift, not even in daylight. One thought consumed her. If Tom discovered she had found the photos and destroyed them, he would never forgive her. She believed he was capable of anything, of taking drastic action. She remembered his past behavior, control and harshness disguised as care. She had once mistaken it for protection. Evenings became a constant strain. To cope, Jade spread a plastic sheet from Tom's garage across her bed. It wasn't rational. It was an attempt to feel clean, to feel safe. She could only sleep fully dressed, with the lights on, a knife in her hand. She held it all night. Reality and fear blurred. Exhaustion brought no relief. The paranoia grew. Her greatest fear was that Tom would learn what she knew and what she had done. She lived braced for impact, body and mind locked in fight or flight. Doubt, panic, revulsion, and fear became unbearable. The pressure eroded her ability to think clearly. In that fragile state, she began planning her next move. Overwhelmed, she reached out to a man she barely knew, someone she'd met once at a party. They weren't friends. There was no trust, just a vague memory and a phone number. She sent a brief message. She needed help. No explanation. There was no response, neither after an hour nor the next day. He read it and said nothing. The silence deepened her isolation. No one knew what was happening inside her. The one person she'd contacted either got scared or didn't want to get involved. She was alone again with too many thoughts, overlapping, colliding, confusing her. She walked into a hardware store and filled a basket with things she'd never imagined buying. Sedatives, a rope, a shower curtain, gloves. Her heart pounded. The cashier glanced at her but didn't ask questions. She paid and left quickly. One question echoed. What if he survives? The items felt too obvious. Maybe this was just a desperate cry for help. That night, she sat in her car wondering if she should leave. Just drive and never look back. But where would she go? She had no plan. No one to turn to. Only fear. If she ran, Tom might still have backups. Still have the power to do harm. Inside her, a battle raged. The desperate urge to end it all against the horror of crossing that line. Committing such an act didn't feel like a solution. It terrified her. But living with what she had seen felt impossible. It was a closed loop with no exit. On the morning of December 31, Jade picked Tom up from the rehabilitation center. Despite his frailty and a recent episode of self-harm, doctors discharged him with a signed waiver. She helped him gather his things and drove him home. On the way, and once inside, she supported him. He was too weak to move around on his own. She set up a first-floor bedroom. Water, medication, pillows, everything looked like care. But her plan was already in motion. With his discharge, Tom had been prescribed Zolpadman, a strong sleep aid. Knowing how powerful it was in large doses, Jade gave him several pills under the pretense of helping him rest. He took them without question. She watched the sedative take hold. His speech slurred, his movement slowed, and within an hour, he couldn't get out of bed. His eyes went vacant. His breathing grew heavy. He was alive but completely incapacitated. Jade sat by his side, calm, expressionless, fully aware of his helplessness. There was no turning back. Inside her, everything went still. Time, thought, doubt. The man she once considered family was now fully vulnerable. The house was silent. No shouting. No confrontation. Just him motionless in bed. And her watching, holding the power to decide what would happen next. When Tom was almost immobile and too heavy for Jade to move from the porch to inside, she realized she needed help. She started texting people. First, she reached out to a man she had once casually dated, keeping her request vague, asking if he could help her get her stepfather inside, because he wasn't feeling well. He arrived quickly, but froze when he saw that Tom was limp and barely responsive. Sensing that something was seriously wrong, he hesitated. Jade insisted that he just help her carry Tom inside and that was all she needed. The man touched Tom, felt him not react, then backed away and walked away without saying a word. He never responded to her messages again. Jade then contacted a younger acquaintance, telling him she needed help with household tasks. When he arrived and found Tom almost motionless on the floor and Jade's distant demeanor, his anxiety increased. He also refused to help, saying the situation felt wrong and that he had to go. Both men sensed danger, but neither called emergency services or alerted anyone. They walked away, leaving Jade alone with Tom, who was still alive. His breathing was shallow and labored, his consciousness fading. He couldn't speak or move, but he was still alive. Trapped in a failing body, Jade was alone with him, now completely immobile. She didn't act immediately. Hours passed after she managed to pull him inside. He lay on the floor while she paced, unable to decide, yet already past the point of no return. Late that night, she put a plastic bag over his head. He didn't resist. She stood nearby, watching his breathing slow, then tightened a rope around his neck. Everything happened in silence. Tom stopped moving. The next morning, she moved his body to her car, wrapped it in fabric, tied it, and pushed it onto the back seat. The car sat for hours in the direct sun with the windows up. Jade stayed inside, paralyzed by indecision. Her phone was silent. No one was looking for Tom. The house was eerily quiet. By evening, she dragged the body into the backyard. Among old boxes and discarded items, she tucked the body into a corner, wedged it between crates, and covered it with debris so it blended in. Then she went back inside and locked the door. A full day passed. Jade didn't leave the house. She ignored calls and messages, acting as if nothing had happened. No one asked questions. It appeared Tom had simply vanished. Days went by. He did not contact anyone and did not return to the rehabilitation center. At first, the staff wasn't alarmed, but by day 3, they grew concerned. On the 5th day, around 2:00 p.m., on December 31, 2020, the San Diego County Sheriff's Department received a call from Jade Jenks, 37. She reported that her stepfather, Tom, an elderly man who had just finished treatment at a medical facility, was missing. Jade appeared concerned, saying that he had disappeared without warning. On the surface, the situation seemed routine. An elderly person with health problems might get lost. However, Jade's tone made the dispatcher suspicious. She was too calm, but also a little rushed and unnatural. The call was recorded and a patrol was sent to the house. Jade greeted them, polite but tense, and repeated her story. A quick look around the property and a brief walk through the house revealed nothing suspicious, and there was no legal basis for a full search. Jade described Tom's clothing and shared his contact details. The next day, rehab staff informed police that Tom hadn't picked up essential documents and medication, and his phone had been off for days. Suspicion deepened. Police returned to speak with Jade, and the tone changed. Her composure slipped, and she began contradicting herself when asked about recent messages with Tom. She said she had deleted them to move on with her life. Investigators flagged this immediately. The next morning, police obtained a search warrant, With legal authority, they conducted a thorough search of the house and yard. Initially, they found nothing. No visible signs of violence. No struggle. No blood. Jade, tired but composed, gave brief answers and insisted she didn't know where Tom had gone. The backyard was cluttered with boxes and construction debris. It didn't draw attention initially. Investigators noted the mess but didn't look closely. Additional searches that day also found nothing. The next step in the investigation is to review nearby security cameras. In one video, investigators saw a car stop in front of Jade's house the night Tom went missing. Then someone carried a wrapped object out of the garage. Despite the poor quality of the video, the footage was enough to raise suspicion. Police returned to Jade's house with -9 dogs. The dogs reacted near the backyard, prompting investigators to examine a pile of boxes and tarps stacked in a corner near the alley. Underneath the tarp, they found the edge of a rug. Underneath it was a wrapped body. This was the turning point in the case. Jade was inside the house at the time and was asked to come out. At first, she seemed confused, as if she didn't understand what was going on. When she heard the news that a body had been found, she reacted with unusual calm. No panic, no tears, just tense silence. The victim was quickly identified as Tom Merriman. Although the body was only just beginning to decompose, the clothing and identifying features matched. Investigators determined that Tom died within 24 hours of his disappearance. From there, they had both digital and physical evidence. Jade's house was sealed, electronic devices were confiscated, and text message history was recovered. The cover-up was over. Jade's legal status changed from witness to suspect. She was arrested and taken to the police station. Her lawyer attended the interrogation. Jade refused to testify. She said she did not know the cause of Tom's death and insisted that their relationship was normal. While forensics gathered evidence, investigators focused on Jade's phone. Forensic analysis found messages in which she asked acquaintances to pick Tom up and take him home. 2 recipients confirmed the messages and gave statements. One left because she felt something was wrong. The other refused to participate. In Jade's Notes app, authorities found a suspicious shopping list: gloves, bleach, plastic sheeting, rope. Receipts and surveillance cameras confirmed that these items were purchased days before Tom died. Jade's laptop showed searches for effects, toxic doses, and asphyxiation, leaving no obvious traces of zolpidem. On the carpet where the body was found, forensics found DNA and fibers from Tom's clothing. On the plastic sheet, they found Jade's fingerprints. Although she denied involvement, phone records confirmed that Jade picked Tom up from the hospital on the day he died. During the trip, she sent several text messages, including one that became the focus of the indictment, in which she said that she had got him and that everything was going according to plan. An external examination of the body found no obvious signs of a struggle. However, forensics determined that the body showed signs of asphyxiation and that the concentration of zolpidem was well above the therapeutic range. The conclusion: the cause of death involved both sedatives and asphyxiation. At this point, investigators believed that Tom's death was not an accident. The case turned to the theory of intentional, carefully planned and executed behavior. At the conclusion of the investigation, the district attorney indicted Jade Jenks for first-degree murder. The case file included digital evidence, witness testimony, and expert reports. The trial attracted a great deal of public attention. Journalists were present in court. The interrogation transcript was released, and Jade became the subject of controversy. The prosecution built its case from a series of evidence: text messages, shopping history, and behavior before and after Tom's death. They argued that Jade intentionally led Tom to his death and then tried to cover it up. However, the defense insisted that Jade was a victim. Years of abuse and violence by Tom had driven her into a state of mental breakdown and despair. Jade's attorney proposed a partial plea deal to reduce her sentence and avoid life in prison. But the prosecutor rejected it. Asking for the maximum sentence, Jade took the stand for the final testimony. She said she felt no guilt for what happened, but regretted not leaving the situation sooner. After weeks of trial and days of deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts. Based on the investigation, forensic evidence, and witness testimony, the judge sentenced her to life in prison without parole. In his closing remarks, the judge emphasized that despite Jade's personal trauma, stress, and shock, she did not have the right to take justice into her own hands. All decisions must be made within the law. After the verdict, the prosecutor declared that justice had been served. He acknowledged that the case had many complex ethical issues, but said Jade's actions were legally indefensible. Jade's defense attorney announced that he would appeal, arguing that the court had not fully considered the long-term psychological damage Jade had suffered. The verdict sparked public debate. Some people supported the court's decision, praising legal order and accountability. Others expressed sympathy for Jade, saying she was cornered by a system that failed to protect her. Jade appealed a few months later but lost. The sentence was upheld and became final. The story concludes: from a seemingly close family relationship, ending in death, shock, legal battles, and life imprisonment,